The extinction of the human race began on Earth. The streets were strewn with a huge number of human bodies. The bodies of people did not have time to decompose, but the birds tore them to pieces. The crows fed on human flesh, and their bodies could lie on the streets for weeks because no one took them away. All these horrors took place on the roof of the huge Omega Tower. It was a tall and lonely building in the middle of a dense forest. It consisted of several levels, on each of which horrors took place. There were always people near it who tried to support it. After all, the tower constantly existed due to a complex mechanism that needed to be monitored. If it failed, hundreds of people who worked on it would die. Each of them had to pull, and those who did not do this, they simply killed. Because of the dense forest, it was impossible to approach the tower. Moreover, the people who were there were in mortal danger. Due to their efforts, the tower began to rise again. They were happy because finally they managed to do it. But a man named Mina was not at all happy. He simply watched what was happening and remembered the day he got here. He knew what huge sacrifices it cost all the people who were on the tower. Each of them had their own story of the struggle for survival. It all started with a verdict when he was accused of a terrible crime. Mina was accused of a special case, and it was he who was involved in the murder of ordinary people. That day became the most terrible in his life. The guards took him out of the hall and were about to carry out the punishment. Now, until the end of his days, he must stay in the Omega Tower. From the very beginning, the rules of staying in the tower were explained to him. Mina, like many other people, had to take a special oath. As a result, he lost all his human rights. Now, everything would depend only on him, and he was ready to hear his own verdict. His hands were shackled with heavy metal shackles. The guy tried to break free but could not move. He was to receive the most severe punishment. He was sent to Island 58. Mina could not believe it and tried to justify himself. He denied his guilt and said that he had not killed anyone. The guy wanted to be heard and given the right to live. But no one had ever managed to escape his punishment. In the office, against the backdrop of the city, sat an influential man. He decided the fate of thousands of people, and it was he who was going to defend the accused. Now he held Mina's questionnaire and was going to help him. For him, it was a great honor, and he tried to do everything in his power. He promised him to take care of the case and force the judges to reconsider the sentence. In addition, he tried to calm him down. Suddenly, important guests came to his office. At this time, he was talking to the senator, so he agreed to talk later. His new task was to organize a special meeting place for the senator. And having promised to do this, he hung up the phone. Island 58 was a real hell on Earth. It was a place where the most dangerous criminals were. There were no rules on this island, and everyone fought for their lives. The only law that reigned on this island was physical strength, and only the one who was the strongest and ruled over everyone else could win. The island was called Hell 58. In addition, there were a lot of people on the island who wanted revenge. They wanted to take revenge for their unfair stay in this place. Everyone who was not lucky enough to get to this place had to work hard. Together, you tried to build giant structures that made no sense. Men were engaged in cutting down trees and building huge wooden houses. The working conditions were so difficult that many could not stand it. But among the prisoners, there were a lot of people who did not give up. One of them was Arthur Joe, who most wanted to leave the island and stay alive. Another such person was Khan. All his life, he dreamed of returning the throne and power that was taken from him. Ed Argyne wanted this no less than anyone else. But his goals were much more ambitious, because he wanted to establish his own rule over the entire island. And ordinary people who were also on the island did not set such high goals for themselves. Most of them were very weak and scared. Therefore, they simply tried to do everything to stay alive. The day they got to the island, their story of survival began. Everyone knew about the terrible things and conditions on the island. No living soul wanted to get here for anything. After all, it was the most dangerous place on Earth, where almost no one managed to survive. Every day could be the last, and it was a real struggle for life. After all, the people on this island were especially cruel. They were ready to kill each other for anything. Human life on this island was not valued, and every day they died. Now the woman tried to escape from her pursuers. She was too weak, therefore, she could not protect herself. The girl was so nervous and afraid that she tripped and fell to the ground. Despite the pain and severe fatigue, she did not stop and continued to run. But I realized it was too late. At this time, there was also a fierce fight on the other side of the island. The men were armed, so they fought to the death. Mina tried to break away from the attackers and defend himself from the men who wanted to kill him. He had to kill them to have a chance at survival. Every step could be the last, and at that moment, another enemy appeared. His attack was so strong and unexpected that he fell to the ground. In front of him was the leader of the most brutal gang that killed innocent people. On the other side, the girl remained alive, but she was seriously injured and could not escape. Ed Argeen was sitting in front of her, who wanted to commit his terrible crime. She began to tremble from fear and could not utter a single word. Ed Argeen wanted to listen to her, but she only cried and screamed. At that moment, she was in the territory of her mother, who was supposed to protect her. However, Ed Argeen did not pay attention to this because he had long since stopped believing in her strength. It seemed that the girl began to understand who was in front of her and why he was worth fearing. It was Ed Argeen, who in the past was a lieutenant with the rank of S. And when he approached and began to speak, it seemed that she stopped breathing. Realizing her mistake, the girl began to apologize and beg to let her go. And now, when she found out who was really in front of her, it was clear that she had no chance. Ed Argeen ordered his servants to tie her to a tree, and he himself was going to commit a cruel crime and payback. He touched her body with a sharp knife. The girl began to tremble again and had already come to terms with the fact that she would die. For Ed Argeen, it was just a game, and he did this with all his victims. From terrible pain, she began to scream and cry. However, Ed Argeen did not stop until drawings and symbols appeared on her body. When he finished, he stepped back to look at his drawing. He checked if he had written everything correctly, and when everything was ready, they were going to go visit the fly. The fly lived in the huge temple of a boa in the east of the island. It was Khan, who also belonged to the rank of S. His temple was a special place where his servants came and carried out orders. One of them was a strong man who just now entered it. Khan did not expect his visit. Therefore, he understood that something unforeseen had happened. He always ate alone, however. This time, he invited Moi to eat with him. However, he refused and simply reported that the crow was already waiting for him. Meanwhile, another man was hurrying to the house. Khan did not understand what could have happened so terrible and why he had to know about it. The frightened guy wanted to report that someone had attacked them on the way here, and in his opinion, it was Ed Argeen. Soon, they found a large number of corpses on their territory. Now they needed to do everything in order to find Ed Argeen and protect their people. The attack occurred on their territory, near his palace. Therefore, they could not delay. Meanwhile, after the crime, Ed Argeen and his unit were calmly walking through the forest. They were moving towards the palace of the fly, who was their leader. But suddenly, Ed Argeen saw something strange in the bushes in front of him. This made him stop and look around. In front of him, he saw an old man in a cape. Ed Argeen knew him because he started smiling when he saw the old man. In addition, he knew that this old man was very dangerous and experienced. During his long stay on the island, he defeated many enemies and became stronger than anyone else. The man knew about the crimes that Ed Argeen had committed and accused him of bullying the weaker ones. The others did not take his words seriously and were ready to kill the old man. One of them even approached him. He openly began to threaten the man. After all, he believed that he could easily overcome and kill him. However, the man was not going to tolerate such an attitude towards himself. Without delay, he delivered a strong and accurate blow. The opponent did not even have time to react because he did not expect the attack to be so fast. After that, a strong blow to the stomach, from which he finally lost his balance. He fell straight at the feet of Ed Argeen. But Ed Argeen was in no hurry. He did not dare to attack the man because he knew how dangerous an opponent he was. In fact, in front of them was the king of the horde of rank X, who had been a military commander in the past. Ed Argeen's face twisted with anger. He was so angry that he began to tremble. And as a result, he began to beat his servant with even greater force for daring to attack the king. No one on this island had the right to talk to him like that, and whoever did this would face severe punishment. Ed Argeen tried to calm the old man down because his servant had received what he deserved and was barely breathing. Despite the fact that he was old, no one had ever managed to defeat him. This time, Ed Argeen did not want to take any risks, but he understood that sooner or later they would have to meet. Therefore, they simply left, leaving their partner to die. The king of the horde silently turned around and was also about to leave. Meanwhile, a military plane was moving towards the island. In the middle was a new batch of newcomers who were supposed to replenish the island. They all understood that this was a one-way road, and few of them would be able to hold out even until dawn. After all, this was the place for the worst criminals, and legends were made about it. And all of them were people who deserved this punishment. The voice repeated it to them over and over again. However, the boy could not understand why he had come here. In a minute, they would find themselves near the Omega Tower, which was the worst place that a person could ever create. Ed Argean was a special criminal because his crimes were especially cruel. He kidnapped little girls and did terrible things to them. The scum condemned their mothers to cruel suffering. After all, he could kill them right in front of their own mothers. Ed Argean convinced the girls that they were dying, and their parents never admitted it. He lied every time. His crimes were especially cruel. The woman who lost her own child now found herself on an island. She was the mother who was served by so many people. Every time she was tormented by nightmares, and everyone knew about what happened to her. This time, they received a new notification from the depths of the forest, and they learned that Ed Argean began to approach and was preparing for war. Meanwhile, the plane doors began to open. At the exit, a man in military uniform greeted them and congratulated everyone on their arrival in Hell. Everyone had to leave the plane in turn and stand on the yellow line. He had a gun, so no one dared to resist. One by one, all the men started to leave the plane and go outside. From that moment on, everything began for them. The man with tattoos was glad that they were finally there. He was tired on the plane and could finally breathe fresh air. In addition, due to the terrible conditions, it smelled very bad inside. The soldiers began to check the names of the new recruits. But when they found out that the criminal with tattoos was among them, they could not believe their eyes. No one dared to speak to him, even though they were armed. One of them was so scared that he went to the edge of the building. He stared at them for a long time and was ready to jump because he did not want to be near such a monster. However, at this very moment, his colleague approached him, who brought him out of his thoughts. Without even suspecting it, he saved his life. Together, they enjoyed the views, behind which was a continuous hell. Everything was ready, and all the newcomers stood in one line. Among them were different criminals, but they were all real monsters. The thief was happy because the air here was special. Suddenly, one of the criminals dared to speak to him. The man immediately began to threaten him because he could not tolerate such an attitude towards himself. But the man promised to meet him later and find out everything. The soldiers finished counting and realized that they had not missed anyone. Now this tower was to become their new home. From that moment on, none of them had any rights anymore. They all had an ordinary life, and the life of each of them meant nothing anymore. They were called scum who deserved such treatment. But before they could begin, each of them had to make their own choice. They had to choose between life and death. If they chose death, then they again had two options: to die simply like those people behind them, which were the bodies of men who did not come down from the tower and died of hunger. In that case, there was no chance of salvation because the criminals were not given food. Another option is easier. You could just jump off the tower. Therefore, it was best for those who wanted their suffering to end there. And yet, if one of them chose life, you couldn't miss your chance. There was only one option: to choose the door with the letter D. As soon as the door opened, a tunnel would appear, and all you had to do was just jump down. It was safe, because a special resistor was activated in the tunnel, which was supposed to stop people. And it was from this moment that their survival was supposed to begin. But you couldn't forget that from this moment on, they would go to hell. Therefore now, everyone had to choose life or death. But before he started, the man was going to give a hint on how to survive in this world. He pointed to a boy standing in the crowd. His rank was very small, so he had the least chance among all the other men. And as it was known, the island belonged to the most famous thief of all time, Arthur Joe, who kept everyone in fear and was considered one of the most dangerous. And those who chose life and had such a low rank were to be a special gift for Arthur Joe. He was to be their ray of hope. All the men looked at each other and turned their attention to the boy. It was Seo Min of the FF rank. Now the plane was about to take off. His engine started and he began to rise into the air. Now, the people were left alone on the island. Suddenly, a strange man approached the boy. He carefully examined Seo Min and walked around him in circles. The suspicious guy began to mock him and noticed that Seo Min was very scared. But suddenly, a bald man approached him. With one strong blow, he sent him into a deep knockout. The blow was so strong that he flew several meters away and almost fell from the roof of the Omega Tower. After that, he approached Seo Min and grabbed his clothes. The criminal held him up in front of him. Now, he was going to check if the guy really belonged to the rank of FF. And to prove his words, he showed him his wrist with the tattoo. And now, his words turned out to be true. But Seo Min had done nothing wrong to get such a rank. But now, it didn't matter anymore because he ended up in hell with all the other cruel criminals. The bald man wanted Seo Min to stay with him. The soldiers on the plane didn't know which of them would last the longest. However, this time, it was harder to choose one favorite, because there were very few such special people. The bald man insisted on taking Seo-min with him. It was Vidar, a Class A criminal, and if anyone had objections, he was ready to defend his interests. A man with long hair stepped forward. He had objections. The other also didn't like the fact that Vidar decided everything on his own. Everyone wanted to take this guy with them. After all, it was with his help that there was a chance to survive after meeting Arthur Joe. Therefore, the man was brutally beaten and all his teeth were knocked out. The criminal with tattoos simply watched what was happening. He understood that enemies were everywhere. Therefore, he had no chance to defeat them all. This group of people were just going to play kings and wanted to establish their own dominance. It was an S-rank Kleiper, and from the very beginning, the soldiers turned their attention to him. Furthermore, he had no personal information. Therefore, the soldiers could not learn anything about him and his past crimes. They had never encountered anything like this before. This criminal belonged to the X rank and wanted to punish the man who was looking at him. No one knew his name, but he was also an X class. He kept his eyes on him, and that was what he didn't like the most. Soon, the soldiers were going to land. But before, they had never seen anything like this. Kleeper tried to shout at him and force him to lower his eyes, but the man didn't listen to him. As it turned out, the man was a Class X mercenary who worked for the White Snake, who was known as one of the 4 peacemakers. The mercenaries who worked for him were world-class assassins and were among the 3 most dangerous organizations. Kleiper was annoyed by the mercenary, so he wanted to hit him, but he didn't pay attention to him and simply turned away. The Horde King was one of these people in the past. Blinded by power, he became a rebel and destroyed the entire Federation with his own hands. And Arthur Joe himself was the commander of a Terran unit that killed 15 senators. He was able to penetrate the safest place on Earth and kill all the people who were there. It was he who started the war to gain power on the island. Therefore now, all the people who found themselves on the island were very unlucky because they found themselves on the same island with the most dangerous enemies. Kleeper tried to hit the mercenary but received a strong blow. Everyone looked around and watched what was happening. The mercenary silently grabbed him by the neck and began to strangle him. And despite the fact that each of the people was special and had certain abilities, they were nothing compared to the criminals who had been ruling the island for years. Sooner or later, the same fate awaits them all. After all, they will all die, like Kleiper. And if any of them dares to anger the influential bandits on the island, then, obviously, none of them will be able to stay alive. Without delay, the mercenary was going to go down. The tunnel that was supposed to let people down began to open. He stood in front of him and waited for an opportunity to go down. And everyone else just watched him, not daring to come up and interfere with him. And at that moment, he looked at all the people again for the last time and jumped straight into the tunnel. All the people who saw what was happening understood that it was better not to get involved with that man. After all, he was ruthless and was not going to help anyone. Suddenly, another man rushed straight at Vidar. He was going to hit him, but missed. Vidar managed to step back. He did not expect this at all, so he was even scared. But he was not going to just stand there, so he dealt a strong blow directly to his stomach. Vidar wanted to kill him for daring to attack him so boldly. With this force, he hit his head on the ground. However, he did not notice at all how another man approached him. Taking advantage of the moment, he dealt a strong blow, and Vidar flew several meters away. He did not want the FF rank hero to get to him. After all, he also wanted to take him with him. However, another blow this time, the fat man decided to attack. He dealt a strong and powerful blow that the man had not expected at all. He knocked him to the ground and stood in front of Seo-min, who he also liked. However, the other one also joined the fight and wanted to hit the big guy, but he failed to do so. After all, the fat guy was ahead of him and was able to block the attack. Now, he was going to tear off his head himself. Now, the other people also started fighting among themselves. They bit each other, tore off body parts, and broke bones. Each of them wanted to establish their own dominance and take Seo-min with them. All of them were ready to kill each other. And the guy just watched what was happening and could not understand why he was so valuable to them. And why did they even decide that he belonged to one of them? Many people were lying on the ground unconscious. And suddenly the fat man met the eyes of another dangerous man. They began to fight among themselves. And the fat man wanted to attack first, however, his enemy was faster, so he dodged. When the fight started between them, all the men turned their attention to it. And now, they saw that Seo-min started to run away from them. Therefore, they all chased after the guy, and Seo-min wanted to have time to jump into the tunnel and save himself. He was in a hurry with all his might, and there were only a few meters left to jump. Meanwhile, on the ground, two men were moving through the forest. They learned to jump on trees and thus could move quickly. They were in a hurry and seemed afraid of being late. After all, this could not be allowed, because then their leader would be very angry. They were supposed to appear at dawn, but one of them overslept. Moreover, at night they went hunting, and it did not bring any results. But until the fly appeared, they still had a little time. It was just necessary to hurry up and hope that they would have time. All the people who were on the island were hurrying to the tower. They knew that on this day, a party of newcomers had arrived who were supposed to descend from the tower. People from different gangs wanted to be the first to get their new prey and the chance to establish control over the prisoners. They all waited, taking up positions. Ed Arguin was watching them all. He simply could not miss this event, so he also approached the foot of the tower with his own people. But people did not go down, and many understood that waiting any longer was very risky. And suddenly, one of them appeared. This man was alone, and everyone immediately noticed that he behaved very confidently. It was a mercenary who started going down first, but the others decided to wait until someone else came out with him. It seemed that the mercenary really had nerves of steel, or he simply did not understand where he was. Suddenly, he began to look straight at them. No one could believe it. No one could believe that he was so brave. Suddenly, the man turned and began to look in another direction. He turned his attention to the flames that were far on the horizon, and suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, he disappeared. The bandits wanted to send someone after him. But at the last moment, they decided to go all together, to definitely catch up and catch him. Soon, other people who were reinforcements were to come in their place. The leader of this unit believed that they would be able to catch him quickly and return. But suddenly, he stopped because he heard strange sounds that began to approach them. Therefore, he ordered everyone to concentrate and prepare. He turned his attention to the noise that came straight from the sky. Never before he had seen anything like this on the first day when newcomers arrived on the island. Usually the crows did not appear immediately, but after a few days, just when one of them was dying. Meanwhile, at the last moment, Seo Min managed to break away and jump down. But the men did not want to let him go so easily, so they jumped with him. Suddenly, all the other people who were chasing him did the same. Seo Min began to fall, but it seemed to him that he had been flying for a very long time. Suddenly, a special mechanism started working, which stopped the people below and did not allow anyone to crash from the fall. As soon as everyone was at the bottom, the chase for him would continue again. After a while, all the people were on the ground. They all looked at the guy, but they understood that he would start running away again as soon as they got closer to him. Seomin tried to explain his behavior because he did it only because he was scared, and promised never to run away from them again. But the men didn't listen to him. They approached and hit him with all their might. In pain, Seomin bent down and crouched on the ground. The guy tried to stay on his feet, but one blow made him fall to the ground. The bandits threatened to kill him if he started running away from them again. But Seomin didn't answer. He lay on the ground and lost consciousness. A group of people who were late, led by Chen Long, hurried to the tower. Finally, they were near it and stopped just before the exit. However, they didn't see the people or their bodies and didn't know what it could mean. It seemed that they were late, but the chief didn't want to believe it and got angry. He didn't jump to conclusions. After all, he noticed that the entrance was very clean, which meant that people hadn't left. So they waited, and soon, people appeared and started leaving the tower. All the bandits who were watching this held their breath and prepared to attack. The fat man was carrying Seo Min in his arms. But, for now, the people were in no hurry to attack because they were waiting for a more suitable moment. The group of men couldn't wait to attack and chop them to pieces. However, they didn't even notice that there was another, much more dangerous enemy behind them. The boy felt his heavy breathing and jumped in fright. The fat man threw Seo Min to the ground. For such a small-looking boy, he was quite heavy. But if he didn't have a double F rank, he would have been dead a long time ago. Now the bandits were trying to decide what to do next. They thought that they should all unite and give the boy to Arthur Joe together to have a chance at survival. Otherwise, they had to decide who would keep him. Therefore, all the people gathered to make a common decision. However, Vidar still insisted on his own. He wanted to take the boy for himself. Everyone was surprised when they saw him alive. Suddenly, they heard a scream coming from the forest. A massacre occurred in the forest because Ed Arguin, who had imperceptibly approached the group of men, started the massacre. The man used his authority and knew that no one would dare to attack him out of fear. Ed Arguin could not allow anyone to get rid of the newcomer who had a special rank. He showed everyone his dead body and made it clear that this would happen to anyone who got in his way. A group of people heard a strange noise in the forest, but they could not understand what was happening. Now they saw a man coming towards them. It was Ed Argeen, who moved slowly and confidently. His hands and body were covered in the blood of the man he had killed. He saw that all the newbies were scared and started laughing at them. But it wasn't that simple, because the group led by Chen Long was watching everything that was happening and was preparing to strike. The other people didn't dare to come out, because it meant a quick death for all of them. They knew that it was better not to joke with Ed Argeen, because he was very dangerous and unpredictable. Now, he started walking among the crowd of newbies, looking at each of them. The recruits were terrified, but could do nothing. After all, he was dragging the body of his dead victim right behind him. And by doing so, he was showing the recruits his strength and influence. His men also came out of the forest and grabbed the men by the hair. They began to drag the men behind them. Their bodies were thrown in the middle of the clearing, right in front of the recruits. Now, Ed Argeen's group stopped in front of the prisoners. A heavy silence fell. The man warned that he was not doing this to intimidate anyone. But the fat man did not take his actions seriously and began to call him names. Hearing this, Ed Argeen began to laugh. The newcomer's behavior was very aggressive, but he even liked it. The group of people did not react to his laughter and just silently looked at him. Now, Ed Argeen gave his own name and was going to tell everyone about himself. In the environment, he was called a guy who caused trouble. Everyone on the island made every effort to kill him, however, no one ever managed to do it, because they created their own rules that could exist on the island. And Ed Argeen was exactly the one who always tried to break these rules. He allowed himself to break everything he wanted and kill everyone he wanted. If he wanted something, he would achieve it by any means. He called himself the chaos that existed on this island. People listened to his story, but did not understand what he wanted to say. However, Ed Argeen was convinced that they should be glad to meet him, because he had a proposal for all newcomers. Now, he wanted to choose someone from the crowd who would join him and become his servant. These people should have enough strength and courage to break the rules. And he warned that he would not rest until someone decided to join him. Come on, he warned the people not to disappoint him. Those who had a high rank and wanted to stay alive had to join his team. And the people whose rank was not so high could stay standing. He promised that they could get anything they wanted. In addition, he repeated that there were no rules in his team, and only by joining him could they become truly happy. Suddenly, one of the men became curious. Therefore, he was the first to decide to make his choice and take his side. The other people were in no hurry and only silently watched what was happening. Vidar also made his choice and decided to join his team. But the fat man remained in place and was in no hurry. Ed Argeen asked why he didn't want to join him, but he coldly replied that he simply didn't like the bandit. Now more people joined him. However, even this was not enough for Ed Argeen, and he wanted more. Suddenly, a B-rank prisoner approached him, who also wanted to join. His rank was too low, but he said that he had been there before and was a good fighter. He promised to try and work on himself to be able to join him. Ed Argeen was silent, but in the end, invited him to come to him. Now, he ordered everyone to take off their handcuffs and check their ranks. After that, when he saw, the man began to tremble with fear. He wanted to make him laugh because before, this guy behaved quite confidently. And immediately, the newcomer obeyed him and began to laugh. Ed Argeen wanted him to do it louder and make him laugh even harder. But it seemed that he did not understand anything at all, and now, the bandit was going to explain to him. Abilities were given to a person from birth. No matter how hard he tried, he could never develop them. And people like him will never be able to surpass their level and become much better. Ed Argeen grabbed his head, and here the man understood everything. Now Ed Argeen whispered in his ear and called him crazy, and then he simply killed him. Meanwhile, other people began to get closer and closer to Ed Argeen. They prepared their ambush and were ready to attack at any moment. And finally, they decided to do it, so for now their own shelters. The armed men went down to the ground and began to move towards their goal. But suddenly, the leader stopped and began to listen. He noticed that there were no footprints on the ground, and this could mean that the enemies could have noticed them. They decided to turn back so as not to fall into a trap and not risk their own lives. But it was too late, because the enemies were behind them. He realized it too late, and now he had no chance to escape. Moreover, behind him was the same mercenary they were chasing. Out of fear, they began to run in different directions. Having broken away a little further, they tried to take cover. The men had to hide behind trees and bushes to save their own lives. In addition, none of them had seen anything like this with their own eyes. In addition, they did not understand how the mercenaries managed to catch up with them and surround them. Now, they realized that in front of them was not an ordinary guy. They needed to be much more careful with him. The only way to win was to try to ambush him and kill him with one blow. Now they took their place in the trees and waited for the newcomer to appear. They thought the boy hadn't noticed them, but suddenly he started talking. The mercenary wanted to ask a question. Now he was on a tree right in front of the man and asked where the Horde King could be found. But he replied that no one knew about his whereabouts because he was a wanderer and could be anywhere. The only way to find him was to go south. He was most often seen near a Buddhist statue, so that's where you could try to find him. The mercenary didn't intend to kill them, so he thanked them for the information and just left. The man was trembling with fear and couldn't believe his eyes. Suddenly, Ed Arguin appeared behind him. He called him a coward and mocked him for behaving like that. Now, he no longer needed him because he had proven himself to be a coward. Therefore, he ordered to give a signal and continue to pursue the mercenaries. But the men understood that they were not at the level to defeat him. On the other hand, he understood that it was necessary to carry out the order, otherwise he would be punished. Still, he had no other choice, so he began to pursue him again. The men set up an ambush and waited until the mercenary was right in front of them. And when that moment came, they decided to strike. Until the very end, the mercenary remained very calm and did not attach importance to the fact that they were trying to kill him. At the last moment, he simply closed his eyes and disappeared as if he had never been there. The guys did not understand anything. They only saw a shadow moving in front of each of them. In fact, it was the mercenary himself who did not go anywhere. He was so fast that no one had time to react to his blows. All the men were mortally wounded, and they were all powerless against him. After what happened, the mercenary calmly stood on the ground. Blood was flowing from his hands, and the bodies of dead people lay right in front of him. The only one who remained alive was the leader of this unit. He looked at the mercenary and could not believe his eyes, because he had never seen such power before. The man began to tremble again, so much so that he could not breathe. He tried to explain this behavior and said that there had been a misunderstanding. The people from his unit did not obey him and decided to attack, despite the ban. Therefore, he wanted to leave quietly and beg not to kill him. But this time, the mercenary did not want to listen to him. Meanwhile, Ed Arguin killed his own husband. He brutally cut his throat right in front of all the other people. Everything was ready now, because the blood of an innocent man was flowing from his hands. Now, he wanted everyone else to really taste hell. Behind him were people who were going to start a hunt for the new recruits and kill them all. Also, he knew about people from other units who had set up an ambush, but didn't dare to come out because of his presence. Because they were all afraid, because they knew how dangerous Ed Arguin was. So now, each of them had to do their best to stay alive. Those who joined his unit could have protection, but the others had to run away because right now, the real hunt was starting for them. The fat man couldn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, Seomin started to come to his senses. The man noticed that he was alive and tried to understand what had happened to him. The fat man approached him from behind and grabbed his clothes. He took the guy and lifted him in front of him because he did not understand at all what was happening. Seomin could not remember for a long time what had happened to him and why he had lost consciousness. When the fat man ordered him to look around him and understand that now he had fallen into a real hell. In disbelief, the main character raised his eyes and saw the horror that was happening around him. In front of him was a mountain of human bodies that were already dead. He saw how people who were weak and could not defend themselves were treated cruelly. Now Ed Arguin turned to the boy. He invited him to join him if his rank was high enough. The fat man let him go, because the only chance to escape was to escape. Otherwise, he would be severely punished. Besides, he was not strong and would not be able to defend himself. Ed Arguin understood that their words could be taken as a refusal, and this meant that it was possible to begin their hunt. Therefore, he ordered all members of his team to get ready. People who did not want to join him had to run away. Suddenly, a huge number of bandits broke out of the thickets and the forest, moving directly towards them. The bandits were hungry and thirsty for blood. Now the prisoners were sure that they had really gone to hell. They could not believe that this was the end now. They would be torn to pieces. But it seemed that the bandits were not joking and were really ready to kill them all, because they smiled and started to catch up with them. With all their might, the men tried to escape and hide in the forest. However, the chances of salvation were too small. One of them was grabbed and thrown to the ground. After that, he was brutally killed by stabbing him in the back. Other people were also caught up with him. The same fate awaited them, and no one from the entire group managed to escape. They were killed, despite the fact that they did not even have weapons and did not resist at all. Some were lucky enough to break away and hide in the forest. But even there, threat and danger awaited them, because the women of the Mother's clan had been waiting for them for a long time. And when it happened, they began to catch up with them, moving along the trees. Now the people were surrounded and fell into a deadly trap. They were packed from the air, and this is what they could not even foresee. The women came down to the ground and began to brutally kill each of them, and only from this they received real pleasure. The group of people who decided to run in the other direction seemed to be able to break away. They tried to break away as far as possible and avoid pursuit. But even here they were in mortal danger and were attacked. The entire area was surrounded, and the bandits were lying in ambush, waiting for their victim. They spared no one, but killed everyone they saw. Moreover, the prisoners' hands were tied, so they couldn't even resist. Terrible screams of people who didn't want to die could be heard around the tower. Meanwhile, Seo-min managed to break away from the pursuit. He stopped to rest because he couldn't continue running anymore and was too exhausted. There were other people with him who didn't stop because it meant certain death. As soon as they stopped, the enemies immediately caught up with them and began to attack. They tried to kill Seo-min, but the prisoners were able to protect him and managed to attack them first. A fierce battle began, as a result of which they emerged victorious. The enemies remained alive, but the fat man wanted to finish them off and kill them. Now Seo-min belonged only to them, and they did not want to give him up. Now, the prisoners began to argue among themselves because they could not decide who the boy belonged to. In addition, they blamed Seo-min for stopping. After all, it was because of him that they almost died again. But he could no longer escape. However, they could not simply leave him because without the boy, they themselves risked death. Therefore, they decided to find a safe place for him where he could hide and rest. After all, if he went with them and stopped again, they would all die. In addition, Seo-min was their insurance, so no one wanted to leave him. The guy noticed that they had started running away again and left him near the shelter. In addition, he heard enemies behind him. He simply had no choice, because soon they would catch up with him, and then he would have no chance. Therefore, he decided to act, and he decided to hide in a hollow to wait out the danger there. Meanwhile, Ed Argeen was evaluating the new members of his team. Vidar was happy when he heard about the hunt, so he also wanted to join them. At this time, his men began to search for the fugitives. However, Vidar's words did not please him. With all his strength, he hit him for such audacity. From a strong blow, he fell to his knees and began to choke. Ed Argeen was not at all the one who spent all his strength searching for hopeless newcomers, and he wanted the man to clearly understand this. He shouldn't have said that anymore because it made him very angry. After all, they didn't obey anyone, but only did what they wanted, and they never took responsibility for their actions. And they killed the newcomers just because it was so much fun. Garia said that they had to hurry because the newcomers could escape. Therefore, Ed Argeen ordered everyone to prepare and start the pursuit. Meanwhile, the king of the horde was sitting in his place, deep in the forest. Usually this was the very place where he could receive notes from other people. Now he learned that new people had arrived on the island. And now, the hunt for them began. He knew that this kind of thing always happened. But he himself had never participated in such a thing. After all, he believed that the newcomers also had the right to life, despite the fact that they were the same criminals. In addition, everyone else was also such newcomers who were simply lucky to escape and stay alive. This tradition always seemed unfair to him. With all his might, Jacoba tried to escape. But now his enemies were too close to him. He did not know if he would be able to escape, but despite his fatigue, he did not even think of stopping. He managed to break away, but his enemies were not far behind. Suddenly on his way, he noticed a large stone, and he decided to use this to hide and wait for the pursuit. The enemies passed by and did not notice him. They began to look for him, but quickly realized that he had simply hidden from them. Meanwhile, the enemies were pursuing another group of people. They did not let them go, and those who fell behind were killed immediately. But suddenly, the leader of one of the groups ordered everyone to stop. Everyone knew that they could not just let go of their victim and had to continue the pursuit. But this time, they decided to act differently. So, they simply stopped. After all, further ahead was another territory that they could not enter. And those who managed to escape, most likely, did not even suspect what awaited them ahead. And if they had known, they would definitely have stayed and decided to die right here. Now, they could not just watch them, so they decided to turn back and stop the pursuit. Meanwhile, the fat man also managed to hide and wait out the pursuit. Freddy Adu took a good shelter, in which he could feel safe for some time. Now that the danger had passed, he could leave the shelter and continue moving forward. But suddenly, he heard the voices of the enemies again and realized that they were starting to approach. Therefore, he quickly took his shelter again and decided to wait out the danger. And at this very moment, the enemies appeared, trying to find the fugitives. Right now, they were in enemy territory, so they couldn't just enter this place. After all, if the leader finds out, they will be severely punished. However, Liang Chaochen did not obey him, and did not even pay attention to the fact that the leader forbade going to enemy territory. Her eyes burned. She wanted to kill and wanted blood. The man could not stand it and began to shout at her. After all, he knew how this could end and did not want to suffer because of her. However, she did not obey him and did not want to return to Khan without the loot. She wanted to go alone and continue her search. But Moy understood that she could not be let go alone. In addition, he understood that she would have to violate the order of the chief again. Moy tried to calm her down and force her to stay. Now, they were standing on different sides. She would not return, and Moy understood this perfectly well. The girl pointed directly in the direction where Freddy Adu was hiding. This was the territory of Arthur Joe, who was the most dangerous criminal, and everyone knew how dangerous he was. Nevertheless, the men left her and began to return in another direction. When the girl was left alone, she realized that she had no chance. Therefore, she decided to return and left the enemy territory. When Freddy Adu realized that it was safe around him, he also decided to leave his own shelter. Meanwhile, the main character continued to sit in the hollow. He listened carefully to what was happening around him and realized that there were enemies right in front of him. They were walking a few meters from his hideout and were trying to find any traces of those who were fleeing. But suddenly they stopped because they heard a strange noise. In addition, they had lost people around this place. Therefore, from this moment on, they should have carefully checked and searched everything again. Suddenly, they turned their attention to the tree trunk that was just behind them. Still, the mercenary killed the man who attacked him. They were all dead because he did not like those who tried to deceive him. In addition, he managed to easily free himself from the handcuffs. From the very beginning, they did not pose any threat to him because he was so strong that he could free himself at any moment. Now he had the weapons of his dead enemies, and the mercenary was going to go south, where he wanted to find the king. He was so fast that in a few minutes he was in the south. He managed to find the very statues where the king of the horde could be. These structures were the most important statues in Indian mythology. Near the statues sat priests who performed their sacred rituals. These were sacred rituals of power, and no one ever had the right to interrupt them. Meanwhile, Seomin began to understand that he was in real danger. After all, now the men were looking straight in his direction, and they were going to check the hollow in which he was sitting. Suddenly, a scream rang out. One of the attackers was wounded by a spear. It was Chen Long, who thought he was saying nonsense, because the fat man they were looking for would never have crawled into such a narrow hole, because it was really very narrow, and even he couldn't fit in there. Besides, they thought hiding in a hole was stupid, and no one would ever choose such a place to hide. Chen Long sincerely believed that there was no one there, and he thought the man who suggested such an idea was a fool. Seomin sat in the hole and listened to everything they said. He hoped that they would just leave him like that. However, a fly landed on his nose and he held on to keep from screaming. The men decided to leave, but at the last moment they decided to turn back. The main character screamed in fright because he saw an insect. The bandit decided to go back and check everything again. Now he was convinced that there really was someone there. And now he was convincing the main character that he was right. He watched the footprints on the ground near the tree, and Seomin sat inside and trembled with fear. Now the bandit approached and began to bend down to look inside. If the boy hadn't screamed, they wouldn't have returned and checked the hollow. But when he saw the hero, he couldn't help but laugh. Now he was ordering him to get out because they were the ones who were able to catch him. And if he didn't do this, they would have to stab him right in the hollow. However, Seomin didn't want to die and was very afraid for his own life. Carefully and very slowly, he began to climb out of his hollow. Seeing him, the bandits started laughing. But suddenly, one of them was attacked and he simply disappeared. The blow was so strong that he flew away from the hero for several meters. His companions couldn't understand what was really happening. They thought it was Seomin. Eventually, they realized that their comrade was seriously injured and most likely dead. Moreover, they did not know from which side they were attacked, so they began to panic. At that moment, they saw a girl from the mother's clan. She was the one who attacked the bandit. Now she and Seomin met eyes. Seeing him, she was scared, so she jumped back. Other people appeared with her, including Moy. He also ordered the boy to be killed. A bloody battle began between the two enemy clans. The Chen Long clan had better weapons and were also much stronger. However, the opponents had a numerical advantage and were very resilient. As a result, the Mui clan managed to win and kill most of their opponents. However, Qianlong was still alive and tried to resist. He did not expect that they would dare to attack them so openly. The leaders of the two warring clans began to fight among themselves. However, Liang Chaochen did not take her eyes off the main character the whole time. The guy even tried to speak to her, but she did not answer. She could not believe her own eyes because she had never met someone so beautiful before. However, the woman remembered that she had to kill him. Otherwise, it would mean the beginning of war, because none of them had the right to let newcomers go. However, they decided to take a chance and let him go, and she showed the boy to sit quietly and not make any noise so that no one would notice him. Seomin understood her without words and decided to do everything as she ordered. Therefore, he hid in the same place again, and the girl simply left. He sat in the hollow, hearing the sounds of the battle and waiting for everything to end. But the men continued to fight. Reinforcements arrived from both sides and everyone intended to kill each other. Suddenly, the Qianlong clan fighters stopped. The boy understood that there was no point in continuing. He began to tremble and understood that this was the end, because all his allies had been brutally killed, and all those who remained alive were completely surrounded. Moreover, his enemy, despite his wounds, looked very calm. And the longer this went on, the worse his situation became. And while he could still stand on his feet, he decided to end it once and for all. But if nothing worked out, then he would have no choice but to accept his own death. But he hoped that he could drag his enemy right after him. With all his might, he tried to wound him, but each time the enemy managed to dodge. In the last attack, he put all his strength, but even this time, he dodged. Now the bandit realized that he was in a very bad situation. After all, his opponent was in a good position and struck. Now, everything was decided for him. After all, the best soldier of the Qianlong clan was dead. He overestimated his own strength and fell into a deadly trap. However, even being in such a situation, he did not want to give up. The man wanted to take him with him, but realizing this, the Mui warrior jumped back. The wounded man, holding a weapon in his hands, began to move towards him. He was bleeding, but wanted to continue fighting. As a result, exhausted, he fell to the ground. The chief saw that his best warrior was dead, and this was a real shock for him. Therefore, he gathered his strength and out of anger delivered the final blow. He tried to kill his worst enemy and do everything to escape from the encirclement. Under the pressure of his blows, the enemy bent down, so he decided to finish him off with his foot. But he did not foresee that Mui was much faster and more agile. The first time he managed to dodge, however, he also managed to escape from other attacks. Each time, he managed to avoid danger and remain whole and unharmed. However, Qianlong did not give up, but tried to do everything possible to hold on. Meanwhile, the recruits managed to gain some advantage and defeat the enemies who were chasing them. One of the people was sitting in ambush and attacking everyone who approached. One of the recruits was captured and tortured. The man did not relax when suddenly he heard footsteps and voices approaching him. As it turned out, it was Ed Argine, along with his men. However, the man was expecting his appearance and began to smile. Ed Argine was shocked because he did not expect the recruits to resist. Just at that moment, he was ready to kill the guy. He was convinced that this was the FF rank recruit that everyone was trying to find. Garia wanted to tear out his tongue for his impudence. The man was furious and wanted to strangle him. However, at this moment, the chief intervened in the conversation and ordered him to come to him. The man could not understand what was happening, but he simply had no other choice. Suddenly, with all his strength, he grabbed him by the neck and pulled him towards him. He didn't like that the man had caught the wrong one and was simply wasting their time. Besides, he should have obeyed his orders, and instead of wasting time on one guy, it would have been better to start looking for others. He promised to kill him if he made another mistake and didn't start being useful. And here, the leader wasn't kidding at all. He ordered Garia to follow him, because right now, an important meeting was to take place. In addition, he praised him for his excellent work and for his attentiveness. This angered the man so much that he couldn't help himself. He was jealous of his leader for Garia. After all, it was with him that he behaved in a special way and allowed himself much more than with others. Ed Argane just stood and silently looked at him. Suddenly, Garia started laughing. He could not calm down, so now the leader paid attention to this. Garia considered the man a child, because only children could be offended by this. And now Ed Argine finally spoke to him. Even after what happened, he did not want to determine his values. In addition, Ed Argine was not going to tolerate his accusations about this. Therefore, if he wanted to get his approval, he needed to prove his worth. After that, Ed Argine left him again. and Vidar silently watched everything that happened. Meanwhile, the fight between the two warring clans continued. Qianlong still managed to hit his opponent and deliver a strong blow. The blow was so strong that the man flew several meters away from him. Qianlong was satisfied with his work. He even relaxed and forgot about another danger. Liang Chaochen, who was nearby, could not help but take advantage of this. Therefore, waiting for a good moment, she began to approach him. The man did not expect this at all and was shocked when he saw the enemy near him. Ling Chaochen was preparing to deliver a strong and powerful blow. At the last moment, he tried to jump back, but because of her strength and speed, he didn't have time to react. As a result, he ended up lying on the ground. The Moi warrior, who was watching this, was amazed that the girl was so brave. And Liang Chaochen calmly waited. She silently looked at him after what happened. Moi didn't let her enter the battle because she wasn't strong enough to fight with them, but the girl just threw up her hands. It proved once again that she was worthy and could fight like everyone else. Moreover, she was able to defeat the enemy leader, which Moi himself could not do. The man was so angry that he couldn't control his anger. Out of anger, he struck the tree with his own knife. The men watched in silence as the situation unfolded, but none of them dared to interfere in his argument with the girl. Moi did not want her to risk her life so much. After all, she was only 16 years old and had no right to fight with them. Nevertheless, he calmed down and approached his opponent, who could not get up. He hoped that the opponent remained alive, because they could not be allowed to die. After all, then they would have to go to war with Arthur Zhou himself, whom they served. But it was too late. The man and all his people were already dead. So now they were in big trouble. After all, Arthur Zhou was one of those who would definitely want to avenge the death of his people. Suddenly, the girl heard the men start laughing. They were standing right in the same place where the main character had stayed. And most of all, she was afraid that they would see him and kill him. In fact, they didn't see him and just heard very suspicious sounds, not far from them. They were sure that someone had started coughing. The girl also heard it, so she started coughing herself. She didn't want them to suspect anything, so she admitted that it was her. However, everything was not so simple, because Moi did not believe a single word she said. After all, he was not so easy to deceive, and he could easily distinguish her voice. Now, Liang Chaochen, the girl realized that she was in real trouble. The chief knew what she was up to, so he ordered her to confess everything before he himself found the reason for her lie. Her legs began to tremble from fear. She thought that this was the end. But suddenly, the man began to accuse her of just trying to make him feel sorry for her. However, he was not going to pity her and support her. Now, she calmed down, because she understood what he really meant. The other men also thought that she was just pretending to be a victim. So, altogether, they just started laughing at her. They wanted to just let her go, but Moi had a different opinion about her. He wanted to know if his men had thoroughly searched everything and checked the area. Everything was clear, so they decided to leave because it would soon be dark. In addition, he ordered the girl not to repeat her own mistakes again, and not to pretend to be an adult and a hero. Still, time was short, so they decided to leave. The girl was going to leave without them, so she stayed behind to pick up her weapons. However, she promised to come back and catch up with them. When they left, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, she could relax, because she had been very nervous all the time about the guy they might find. She approached him and told him to stay in the same place, to wait for her. Xiaomin was very scared and did not want her to leave him. Therefore, she told him to count to 100 and promise to return. But even that did not help, because the matter was completely different. People were returning and were going to wait for her, because they did not want to leave her alone in enemy territory. The girl understood that she could not stay, because it would attract too much attention. Therefore, he should wait until they moved to a safe distance. And after that, he could leave his own shelter and start running away. He started counting, so his voice was heard by the fat man who had been there all the time and returned to pick him up. Meanwhile, another group of bandits stopped when they entered the enemy territory of the mother. They watched as the newcomers began to flee, but they could not continue the chase. After all, it was very dangerous, and it was not possible to just kill others on someone else's territory. After all, there was a legend that the mother maintained her power thanks to the support of Arthur Zhou himself. From the very beginning of the island's existence, power was in the hands of the strongest people. Therefore, no one wanted to contact them and get into trouble. If they dared to enter the territory of the mother, they would immediately find themselves in danger. Meanwhile, the mercenary was calmly moving through enemy territory. But people had to hide from him because they were scared and did not dare to engage him in battle. They saw that this man was not ordinary. Suddenly, one of the women was unlucky to be next to him. She understood that this was the end, but she did not want to die. In front of her, she saw a huge snake that began to squeeze her throat. Therefore, before her death, she decided to strike and try to kill the mercenary. She approached him and tried to attack. However, he remained calm. The allies who were watching her realized that this was a huge mistake. The man closed his eyes and exhaled because he understood that now he could not remain without an answer. He managed to easily dodge the first blow, and she could not understand how he managed to be so fast. Now he began to strike her with his own blow, and she saw other people who began to appear and wanted to save her. A huge number of women gathered around him who were armed. Each of them had a weapon, and there were more and more of them. Also, he could not kill the girl because at the last moment she was saved. Suddenly, the mother appeared, who managed to protect her. The man stood and did not move. He was not afraid, however. He was not going to attack. He simply watched what was happening and how they began to surround him. The girl he tried to kill was the mother's daughter. She began to accuse the man of wanting to kill her. In addition, she was well acquainted with him because they had met before. From his look, it was clear that he knew her well. In the past, they were busy enemies. The girls who heard his name couldn't believe that she could know him. One of them wanted to rush into battle, but she was stopped. Suddenly, he started talking. He took her words as an insult to himself, and therefore he became hostile and wanted to fight. The woman understood that he was angry, so she started laughing. All the girls who were next to him were her daughters, so she was ready to fight him to the death. Moreover, she had not seen him before on her lands. She quickly realized that he was one of the newcomers who had recently arrived on the island. Moreover, she was amazed that he managed to escape from the bandits who should have killed people like him. Still, she knew that he was a very strong enemy and it was very difficult to defeat him. So she suggested that this conversation end and wanted to just leave him. This time, she let him go and warned him not to come near her children again. But he did not listen to her because he did not see his own guilt in what happened. He attacked her only because he had to defend himself. The boss made the woman so angry that she was ready to stay and change her mind. But before she started fighting, there was one thing she wanted to know. Besides, she wasn't kidding when she talked about what could have killed him. She offered him a helping hand and wanted him to join her. The woman understood that this was not enough to convince him to take her side. The man did not answer, so she gave him one last chance to make this choice. In addition, she warned that right now he was on her territory, so it could be very dangerous for him. But even under her pressure, the man remained calm. He understood that she was just trying to intimidate him and threatened him. But his mother did not think so. She had a different opinion, and it seemed to her that she was simply making him an offer. When she spoke, all the girls began to surround him. But he liked the idea of fighting her, and he was ready to accept this challenge. However, he understood that now he had much more important things to do, and he had to find his old enemy. Therefore, he did not want to be distracted and asked if they could just leave each other. Her proposal was valid because she understood that fighting him would be risking the lives of her own children, and it was very pointless. Her youngest daughter began to scream because she wanted to kill him the most. Everyone else watched him carefully, and they looked at him until he disappeared into the forest. Mom understood that over the years he had become much stronger. In addition, she noticed that he had managed to develop a unique fighting technique. After all, he was so fast that he could dodge so easily in a second. This time was enough for him to even strike back and hit her. She had never seen this before and didn't know how it was even possible. Now she thought that the ruler of this island could have serious problems. After all, this man was the one who would have the strength to defeat him. Meanwhile, the boy sat in his own hollow and continued to count. When he counted to 1, he knew that the time had come and it was necessary to leave his own shelter. He was very scared, but still, he dared to do it. But what he saw in front of him scared him very much. In front of him was Freddy Adu, who somehow managed to get to him and was still alive. The man did not take his eyes off him and was glad that the boy managed to survive. He decided to turn back and started counting to 1,000 again. Freddy Adu got angry about this and started shouting at him. He tried to get him out of there, but the kid didn't listen to him and just kept sitting there. Freddy Adu saw everything that was happening and understood that the boy was waiting for the girl who saved him. Also, he didn't like that the boy believed her and was really ready to go with her. But the boy understood that if she wanted to kill him, she would have done it from the very beginning. However, the fat man did not believe a word he said. He was convinced that she was trying to trick him, and that as soon as the opportunity arose, she would kill him immediately, without delay. Seo-min didn't want to go, so he suggested that the man stay with him. But Freddy Adu refused to listen to him. After all, he didn't trust the bandits and knew how it could end for them. All the corpses that were behind him were victims of the same girl who wanted to save him, and it was she who left him alive and didn't kill him, so she could have had another plan. Freddy Adu thought that they could have deceived him and tried to do everything to trap him. The guy became very sad because he still didn't believe his words and hoped that the girl really wanted to save him. However, in reality, Freddy Adu didn't know why she decided to leave him alive. Still, he was convinced that it was not for nothing that death would await him just like everyone else. He fell silent and did not dare to say a word. Suddenly, the fat man suggested that he go to Arthur Joe, but he understood that this could not be done, because he would die immediately when he saw him. Freddy Adu tried to force him to go with him and promised to kill him if he did not obey him. At this moment, the main character realized that he simply had no other choice. In addition, the man warned him that it was not worth running away and that it was better for him to listen to him. Otherwise, he would simply kill him and leave the body in the middle of the forest. After these words, Freddy Adu started, and he shouted to the main character to keep up and catch up with him. Despite the fact that the guy promised the girl to wait for her, he decided to go with him, because his own life was much more valuable to him, and he didn't know for sure if he could trust her. Meanwhile, Moi's soldiers were able to break away to a fairly large distance. The chief constantly made sure that the soldiers didn't lag behind him. But now he noticed that something was wrong, so he decided to stop. He ordered all the soldiers to stop and gather in one place. Immediately, everyone noticed that there was no girl next to them. Despite the fact that she promised to catch up with them, no one saw her again, and she has not appeared yet. But after a while, she returned and said that everything was fine. She convinced the boys that she was trying to catch up with them, but they were too fast. But now, they were very close to the mother's territory, and despite the fact that the men had a fairly good relationship with her, they had to be careful. Suddenly, he ordered his soldiers to take the girl's weapon away. And when she heard this, she started screaming because she could not believe that it could be true. But, in fact, these were the rules, because carrying weapons in enemy territory was strictly prohibited. And whoever broke this rule risks receiving severe punishment. She had no other choice, so she agreed to give up her own weapon. After that, the girl was dissatisfied and looked at her leader angrily. Moi was not going to clarify the situation, so he just waited for her to calm down. But she was so angry that she could not come to her senses. The others believed that it was impossible to take away her weapon and agreed to make sure that she was safe. But Moi believed that this was the only chance to change her habits and save her. It was too late, so who needed to go further? Therefore, they left and ordered Liang Chao Chen not to linger. They didn't even notice that they were being watched all the time and were listening carefully to their conversations. After all, a person had been sitting in the bushes all the time, hiding from pursuit. As soon as they appeared, the fugitive left his shelter. Now, he could finally continue moving forward. Jacoba was tired of sitting in the bushes all the time, because many hours had passed. When they stopped right in front of him, he was very scared because he thought that he had been caught. In addition, he could not understand why people were wearing such strange clothes and were practically naked. But suddenly, he could hear a strange noise behind him. Hiding behind a tree, he saw that people he already knew were approaching him. The fat man and the boy did not expect to see him again on their way. Before that, he chose the approximate direction in which he was going to find Arthur Joe. He overheard that the bandits were heading specifically to his territory, so he was going to follow their tracks. After all, in unknown areas, this was the only chance to find him and get to the right place. Therefore, they needed to move faster so as not to fall behind and not get lost. And all the time, he tried to push the main character to keep up with the day. He had to beat him so that he wouldn't sleep. He even decided to give him a knife so that he could defend himself in case of danger. In addition, he was not going to die instead of him and was ready to leave him at any moment. But the man himself understood that he needed him in order to survive. And all this was necessary because of his special rank, because everyone knew that Arthur Joe was interested in people like the boy. He was going to use him coldly for his own purposes. Do everything to stay alive in this hell. But suddenly, Seo-min heard strange sounds in front of him. At this moment, they met another bandit, whom they were already familiar with. Jacoba also did not expect to see them. For some time, they stood opposite each other and did not dare to approach. The men began to be silent, because they had not seen each other since the moment they began to be pursued. Jacoba thought that they were already dead, but smiled when he realized that this was not so. He was very surprised that such a large man managed to hide and not be noticed. After all, he had a lot of excess weight, which could prevent him from running or fighting. They were very aggressive towards each other. But in any case, it was nice to meet again. He was especially happy when he saw the living guy, who he also really needed. He was going to look for him, but now there was no need for that. However, the man did not want to give him away so easily, because the main character belonged to him and he was going to use him. However, Seo-min tried to defend himself and denied his words. He believed that he belonged only to himself, and he was simply forced to go with them. The fat man tried to calm him down, but it was too late. Because Jacoba heard their quarrel and started laughing. Freddy Adu didn't like it very much, so he started threatening him. Jacoba saw that the boy was holding a knife and thought that he was his prisoner. He started to mock them and tried to do everything to anger them. This very coincidence that the main character was holding a knife seemed very funny to him. Nevertheless, he decided to agree with their opinion and admit that it was the boy who was sold. He knew about the importance of the main character no less than the others. Therefore, he began to demand that Freddy Adu give the boy to him and just leave. In that case, he promised to let him go, but if Freddy Adu did not obey him, there would be a fight. Freddy Adu did not take his words seriously and did not believe the threats. However, he understood that a fight could not be avoided. Both bandits were very aggressive towards each other. They were going to kill each other for the main character. But for some time, they just stood opposite each other, looking into each other's eyes. None of them dared to strike the first blow. Freddy Adu understood that this could not continue any longer, because he was in a hurry and did not want to lose the trail that would lead him to the leader of this island. Therefore, he invited the enemy to strike first and gave himself the right to attack. Seo-min did not want them to start fighting because of him. He tried to stop the men to calm them down. But now, it was too late, because he was thrown aside and began to fight. With all his might, they tried to hurt each other, but their fighting tactics were very different. Jacoba was much faster than him, and therefore, he managed to dodge all the blows. He tried to get closer and use the main character. In the heat of the battle, he himself wounded the young man, but stopped a centimeter from his face. Out of fear, the boy even closed his eyes. At this moment, Jacoba got closer to the enemy and prepared to strike. With all his might, he managed to hit him right in the stomach. After that, he began to inflict a huge number of blows, but they did not cause him much harm. Although Freddy Adu was not that fast, he could kill him with one blow. This time, he almost succeeded, because the opponent began to lose his balance. But he managed to recover quickly and continued to beat him. Now, the opponent was preparing to deliver the final blow, which was supposed to be much stronger than the others. He kicked him right in the face. The man hoped that it would work, and he would be able to finish him off. But it was not so at all, because he underestimated his enemy, and Freddy Adu was able to catch his leg, and now was going to throw him to the ground. With all his strength, he pulled the enemy towards him. Because of this, the man found himself in a very difficult position, because he could no longer defend himself from his blows. With all his strength, Freddy Adu pushed him away from him. Jacoba hit a tree, but the fat man began to approach because he did not want to let him go. Jacoba understood that he needed to run away. He tried to get up, but saw that it was too late. The boy who was watching what was happening was very scared, because he thought that this could be the end. I understand that for him, everything could end at that moment. Out of fear, the main character even closed his eyes, because he could not watch what was happening. But when he opened them, he noticed that everything was not at all as he thought right away. Events changed very quickly. Freddy Adu, despite his advantage, could not hurt him. So, at the last moment, he managed to jump back and save his life. Now he was preparing for a counterattack. And having already chosen the best moment, he began to move in his direction. Using the moment and his own speed, he tried to hit him right in the face. But the enemy managed to dodge his blow. He was also going to hit him, but even this time, he managed to dodge. Freddy Adu wanted to hurt him again, but nothing worked. Suddenly, in the heat of battle, he grabbed Jacoba by the clothes. Freddy Adu tried to hit him again, but even this time he managed to dodge. However, he did not stop. Another hit. Now he was too close to finally hit. The opponent understood this. But, at the last moment, he managed to put his hands up and block the blow. He was so strong that he could easily move him from his place. But the man did not give up and continued to resist. When he had no more strength left when he tried to jump back. But Freddy Adu did not want to let him go so easily, and tried to hit him again. But each time, nothing worked. The men continued to fight. A blow from below, and again nothing worked. Now it was Jacoba's turn. He managed to hit him, but it wasn't enough. After a while, he had to run away again. The fat man was nervous because he was much slower. After all, his opponent managed to run away from him every time. Freddy Adu realized that his opponent was not an ordinary coward, but even knew how to fight. He also praised him for his ability to dodge blows and always remain intact. Jacoba also did not keep quiet and called him an ordinary bag. After all, he received a lot of blows and did not have time to dodge. He began to laugh at him because he saw that his words angered his opponent. Jacoba believed that he was already tired because it was noticeable how he had become slower. However, the man considered himself ready and wanted to continue fighting him anywhere. Jacoba was going to rest after killing him. Therefore, after a short pause, their duel continued. But suddenly they stopped because they heard the guy trying to shout at them. He was very tired and begged them to stop for a moment. Now, the main character realized that the two of them were fighting for him, and he didn't think this was the right moment. The men didn't understand what he meant. The guy said that they needed to join forces and survive together until they met the one they were looking for. And until then, they would have a chance to decide who he would belong to. After all, right now, survival came first. In addition, he assured that they didn't need to become best friends at all. They just needed to be together and help each other as long as they were united by a common goal. Jacoba didn't like this very much because he believed he had enough strength to survive on his own. But there was another problem. He couldn't trust the person he had just wanted to kill. So he thought it would be better to decide everything on the spot and agree on who the main character would go with. Besides, it was worth remembering that they were in Hell, where everyone could be his enemy. This was not the kind of place to make new friends. Because of these words, the main character was angry and looked at him with malice. Jacoba wanted to continue fighting, and Freddy Adu accepted his offer. He wanted to show the main character how to finish off a person with one precise blow. But the boy intervened in the conversation and called them both cowards. After all, he did not want them to waste time fighting and still tried to convince them. He called them cowards because they could not trust each other. Jacoba did not like it at all and wanted to hit him for such impudence. But the boy believed that they could join forces anyway. If they were ready to take a step back and find a compromise, he promised to obey and go with them even as a slave. But if they continued their fight, he promised to run away and find people who would be ready to kill them. After that, the men thought about it and began to look at him in a completely different way. Silence fell and they all looked at each other. At first, they thought the guy had gone crazy. But in fact, it was a very good deed. Even on the verge of death, he repeated his words again and promised to run away if they continued to fight. The men understood that they would not be able to control him and follow him all the time. Still, they tried to come to an agreement with each other. They had no other choice, and they promised to work together until they met with Arthur Joe. Meanwhile, events moved north of the Omega Tower. Everything happened on the border of two territories. Mui, along with her soldiers, were going to cross the border and enter her mother's territory. As before, the girl remained dissatisfied. She wanted to return home as soon as possible and get her own weapon. Mui did not answer and constantly tried to ignore her. The other soldiers noticed that he was especially silent. They were late for an important meeting, so they decided to wait. Mui understood that something was wrong, and all the soldiers felt uneasy because they sensed danger. After a while, they began to hear strange sounds. And suddenly, the very man they were supposed to meet appeared. It was the crow himself, and he came out to meet them. At this moment, Mui became very focused. The crow also looked straight into his eyes. He was waiting for them, but Mui's soldiers came on time and were not late. When Liang Chaochen saw him, you became very angry. She started shouting at him and promised to kill him as soon as the opportunity arose. But the man listened to her patiently and did not convey the meaning of her words. He looked at her and smiled, because I do not believe that such a small girl can kill him. He knew that she was the daughter of the Khan himself, and he did not expect to see her in such a place. He also knew that she was constantly under guard, so most likely she just ran away. He warned her that it was very dangerous to be in such a city. She was going to rush into battle, but the leader stopped her. Liang Chaochen got angry again. She decided to retreat but promised to meet again and kill him. But suddenly, one of the soldiers stopped her and ordered her to turn back. He could not allow her to run away from them again. The crow started laughing again, but fell silent when he realized that a weapon was near his neck. It was Mui, who was no longer going to tolerate him and waste time. He ordered them to get down to business immediately and do what they had agreed to do. The man couldn't believe how they had the courage to threaten him like that. Mui tried to find out why he had called them and why he wanted to meet them so badly. But the man didn't answer and again tried to stall for time and just talk to him. However, Mui understood everything perfectly and guessed that it could be a trap. Still, the crow understood that he was not worth joking with, and he agreed to tell everything. But first, he took his weapon from his neck. They had not seen each other for a long time. In fact, he was glad of this meeting. All the time, they had been enemies and were ready to kill each other at the slightest opportunity. In addition, the crow saw that the leader was very tense and realized that something had angered him along the way. It seemed that Moi began to understand what was really happening. After all, at this moment, the crow began to smile. It was time to act. Still, the men managed to agree, and they decided to join forces. They decided to move along the tracks and try to get to the territory where Arthur Joe was. During this time, the bandits managed to get to know each other and even started talking. They were convinced that in a cruel world, only physical strength solved everything. And they said that the main character should be grateful that they allowed him to stay alive. Suddenly, they noticed that the man in front stopped. He tried to find traces and carefully examined the ground to find evidence. In the past, he was a soldier and told about his service. But the other did not believe it, because he did not know how he could be taken into the army with such weight. The hero understood that he had managed to find something terrible on the ground. Meanwhile, Moi understood that the situation on the island had changed dramatically. The crow told him that they could build a new tower and try to escape. Arthur Joe himself was to take care of this, who promised to be the main one in the construction. His plan was very simple. He was going to build a tower and escape from the island. Therefore now, he tried to find allies and unite in order to start construction. The crow no longer wanted to obey him and therefore tried to rebel. For this, he also needed allies, and he tried to win the favor of the warriors of the mother. He promised to come up with a new plan and soon start a war against his ruler. Moi knew that his army had long been preparing for war, but this plan was too dangerous. In addition, he knew that even now, Arthur Joe remained very dangerous. The crow assured that he was the only one to whom he had told about his plan. Moi especially did not want Ed Arguin to find out about this. However, the crow called him an idiot and assured that he had not told him anything. Silence fell again between the people, but in the end, Moi began to speak. He promised to think about his proposal and asked not to tell anyone else about it. He was going to tell the Khan about the crow and his plan to decide whether it was worth gathering an army. The crow again told him that he was going to betray his ruler and wanted to change sides and join another army. He chose only the best option for himself and wanted to be on the winning side. Meanwhile, Seomin was closely watching what was happening. In addition, he understood that he had no chance of surviving after the journey was over, and he was glad that at least now he could enjoy life. But the men assured him that he would live because no one would dare to kill him. Hearing this, Seomin was happy. In fact, no one explained to him how important he was. He needed to explain to Arthur Joe about his rank, and then maybe he would let him live. In addition, he could not run away, because then the men would kill him with their own hands. Suddenly, Jacoba heard a strange noise ahead. He ordered everyone to sit still and not move. In order to be safe, they needed to hide. So they started running from tree to tree to stay hidden and hear what was happening better. He started listening and trying to understand what was really happening. But so far, they didn't see or understand anything. However, suddenly, the main character tripped and fell, causing a lot of noise. As it turned out, they were next to bandits, who immediately paid attention to the suspicious noise. The men realized that they were in danger because they heard them. And again, it was all because of the main character who betrayed them. Immediately, the bandits rushed in the direction from which the noise was heard. The man began to listen and understood that the enemies were approaching them. Moi hurried and jumped into the bushes from where he heard the noise. His warriors followed him, who did the same. And now he saw the men and realized that they could hear everything. Jacoba could not believe his own eyes because they met again. On the other side, other bandits from another tribe came. He had never seen these people on the island before, and he thought that they could be recruits. They seemed very cheerful and even smiled. In addition, the man noticed a very strange detail, because one of them had no arm. Other people also had body parts missing. Some of them had no leg or arm. In fact, they were ordinary slaves who carried heavy loads from different parts of the island. Basically, they were engaged in the exchange of goods and were couriers. People who did not want to fight and die went to this job. Other bandits did not touch them because they would be the only ones who performed such a difficult and responsible task. Jacoba understood that they did not threaten him, so he ordered them to leave. But when the courier saw the handcuffs on his hands, he started laughing. Freddy Adu ordered the guy to give him the knife. With his help, he was going to free himself from the handcuffs. In addition, the couriers offered them water, which they had a lot of. Freddy Adu was hostile to everything, but understood that this did not bother them at all. Without delay, they gave them a bottle of water. Understanding whether they did not trust him, the courier drank it himself. By doing this, he proved that the water was normal and could be trusted. Nevertheless, realizing that he was not lying, the man decided to take water. He began to drink because during his entire stay on the island, he was terribly thirsty. In addition, the men offered them food. They helped them free themselves. Finally, the main character could move his hands and felt free. But Freddy Adu still distrusted people and did not let them get close to him. The bandits told them about their own plan and said that they were going to move in the direction of Arthur Joe. They wanted to know the way to get to him. But Freddy Adu tried to shut the mouth of the main character, who had already told the couriers too much. The guy believed that these people were safe, and they immediately offered to lead them straight to him and show them the way. It was lucky, because now they were moving in the same direction. Freddy Adu could not understand why we should not trust them, but for this, there was a lot of confirmation, because they helped them and even shared their own supplies. In addition, it was a very perfect coincidence, and it seemed that some kind of trap had been set. Understanding their trust and attitude towards him, the courier promised to explain everything along the way. He began to talk about the route by which they could get to him. Right in front of them was a huge mountain that could not be overcome. They had to turn left because in the other direction was the territory of the mother, from which it was very difficult to get out alive. A few hours after the turn, a dry tree would come across on their way, and after that, they should stick to the right side. Then I will continue to tell about other clues that will help them get to their goal. The courier told about a huge temple near which there was a settlement. This was the territory where they could find Arthur Joe himself. But the route was too difficult and no one remembered it. The couriers always walked it, so this path seemed very simple to them. The forest was too dense, so he warned that it was very easy to get lost there. The main character wanted to go with them because I don't believe they could have coped on their own. But they couldn't trust just anyone, even though they didn't look suspicious at all. Freddy Adu wanted some kind of guarantee that they would really be able to show them the way. However, they weren't sure that they could have coped on their own and not get lost. Still, the couriers agreed to show them the way and waited for them to make a decision. Still, the men agreed to go with them, but they warned them that they would kill them all if something unexpected happened. The guy joined them and also started threatening them. Meanwhile, Moy couldn't believe his eyes. All his soldiers who rushed into the bushes were also shocked by what they saw. After all, right in front of them were not at all what they expected. They were ordinary mice sitting calmly in the bushes. Now, they decided to split into groups so as not to repeat their own mistakes again, and the men set off to carry out his order. Moy decided to return to Voran to continue talking to him. After learning about everything, he couldn't help but laugh. In addition, the moment they left, he was left alone with the girl. It was very unwise of them to leave her here with him, and he began to threaten her and said that he could kill her right then and there. Liang Chaochen was not ready for this, so she was very scared. Suddenly, Liang Chaochen was able to pull herself together. She tried to show that she was not scared at all, and she was not afraid. This made the crow smile. At this moment, other people appeared who had already returned. The crow showed her to be silent and not to talk about what had happened between them, but his behavior angered her even more. Moy warned that he needed to warn his own leader about what had happened. Also, Khan wanted to know where Ed Arguin was now, but the crow knew nothing about where he was now. If he knew anything, he would have told about it a long time ago. Most likely he was in a completely different city and was looking for fugitives. But the man understood that in fact he was just wasting his time and was not going to tell about his whereabouts. After all, he did not even hide it and made everything clear with his appearance. But he continued to insist that he would never hide this information and would tell everything immediately if he found out anything. Now he considered the leader Khan as his friend, whom he wanted to serve. But still, he promised to help. And if Khan really needed this information, then he promised to do everything in his power to find him. And now, when they finally gathered, and he wanted to take advantage of this moment, but they could not stay long, so as not to become enemies again and not to remember old grievances. Having said goodbye, the Raven was going to leave and leave them. Khan's soldiers did not want to let him go just like that. But the leader understood that the man could be useful, so he could not be killed so easily. It was necessary to return home. Having moved a dangerous distance, the crow tried to make sure that no one was chasing him. He began to laugh because he realized that the men could believe him, and his trap could work. Meanwhile, the other prisoners managed to reach different parts of the island. Some of them even managed to escape very far. All the prisoners were taken to the settlement where Arthur Joe himself lived. They were all brutally killed, not allowing anyone to escape. Despite the fact that people begged them for mercy, they killed everyone. Ed Arguin watched everything that was happening. With him were his new soldiers, whom he chose from among the prisoners. His new soldier bit people to death because he had a very strong addiction that he could not cope with. The green-haired one was also special, a former police officer, and the black one was a member of a dangerous group in the past. Ed Arguin believed that he would be very useful to his soldier. And at this time, the man who was next to him began to get angry with him again. They killed all the people, so their work was over. He ordered his assistant to reward the new soldiers for a job well done. He himself was going to rest a little. The man wanted to help him and find out if his help was needed, but the bandit refused him and forbade him to go with him. In fact, he wanted to get new assignments from him to prove that he could be useful. But instead, he sent him with Garia to carry out the same task. This again made him very angry. When the bandit returned, he saw that the bodies of the people were arranged in an unusual way. So a name was made of them. Therefore, he wondered who had thought of this. As it turned out, it was Yoji, who found it very interesting. Ed Arguin started laughing because he understood that this could be a provocation. Nevertheless, they decided to go on a new mission and start searching for new fugitives. Suddenly, Vidar attracted the attention of the bandit, who had been walking behind him all the time. Seeing him, he simply went crazy and decided to attack him. The chief turned to see what was really happening and why the man started screaming and ordering him to stop. As it turned out, he hit Vidar with all his strength. Everyone began to closely monitor what was happening. As it turned out, he was angry that the newcomer dared to walk in front of him. He continued to beat him and shout because he was annoyed that Vidar did not respond. It seemed that he was not even in pain because he did not react at all. But suddenly his patience came to an end. He grabbed his hand, but the bandit did not believe that he would dare to hit him. But Vidar looked him straight in the eyes and seemed ready to kill him. Vidar understood that this was a good opportunity to get rid of this idiot. But at the same time, he could have other enemies. Therefore, he understood very well that he would be responsible for his own actions. But at this time, the bandit understood that the man was very strong and could easily break his arm. He continued to hold him, so the bandit wanted to get a weapon, but Vidar saw everything. Still, he decided to let him go. He promised to be careful and not repeat his mistakes again. Now the bandit could go ahead, but he remembered that next time, he might be much less lucky. Ed Arguin said that it was very sad because he thought that one of them would die today. Hearing this, the bandit understood that this was his chance to prove his loyalty. So, he was going to get a weapon and was going to attack the man in order to kill him. But suddenly he stopped. There was a sword near his neck. Ed Arguin predicted his actions and warned that he would kill him with his own hands if he dared to do it. He understood that in fact the bandit was a coward, and this should have been done earlier, not now. Now it would have become a shame for him. After all, the leader expected much more from him than the usual killing of a novice. And nevertheless, he did not want to exchange him for an ordinary novice. Therefore, he ordered to put away the sword and not to do anything stupid. Hearing this, he was happy because he realized that in fact, he was more important. He would be able to get his sword again when the opportunity arose. His main flaw was his speed because he could never finish a task. And he warned him that he had no chance of making a mistake anymore. Vidar listened carefully to their conversation and watched what was happening. Meanwhile, the men entered the mother's territory. They did not understand who she was and why everyone was so afraid of her. Therefore, the couriers tried to explain why she was worth fearing and being wary of. Therefore, he began to speak. As it was known, there were 6 leaders on the island who were independent of each other. The Horde King and his mercenary were loners who had extraordinary strength and were vagabonds. Each had their own forces in their own territory, which they kept under control. Therefore, newcomers were not even allowed to approach them, because without mines, they would simply be destroyed. Mom was one of those who ruled Hell and was at the top of all leaders. And this sign on the tree that they saw meant her territory. No one except Mom herself knew who she was and where she came from on this island. But among her army, which consisted mainly of women, there were really very dangerous people. They were the ones who ruled the northern part of the island and kept everything in that area under their own control. Her lands were places where men could not safely enter because they would face certain death. There was a legend about 5 men who from time to time dared to enter her territory. And one day, she personally found them all and was able to chop them to pieces for what they dared to do. These rumors quickly spread, and from that time on, no man dared to enter her lands. Now, this continued to happen with even greater force because her daughters continued to hunt. And until now, there were special rules and no man was allowed to go to her territory. This simply needs to be remembered, because their lives depend on it. In addition, there were rumors that guards constantly patrolled its borders, watching for those who wanted to enter. This was done in order to consolidate its power and prevent enemies from penetrating inside. Therefore, even couriers never dared to enter its lands. The fact is, it was supposed to be the territory of another powerful leader, and this was the path they were going to take. Why did the territory not have a clear border? Therefore, it was much safer to move there. But the stones near which they stood were considered the beginning of his territory. His lands were located in the south and occupied a huge part of the island. There was a legend that he tried to implement his incredible plan. After that, several of his loyal servants betrayed him and left him, staging a coup. He was the most dangerous and powerful man on the island. Therefore, they could move freely through his lands, unlike their mother's territory. But this did not calm the men at all, because they recognized that all the prisoners who arrived with them were most likely dead. But the couriers reported that today was a special day for the newcomers. The man did not believe his words much, but he had no other choice. Now, he talked about the territories of another leader, which were located in the west. His possessions were the smallest, but his army was very strong. Before that, he ruled the entire island. But after losing the war, he received a very small territory. His soldiers had a special camouflage, which consisted of 4 parts. It was practically impossible to meet them outside their territory, which was quite small. Listening to him, the main character realized that he had seen a girl from his army. Now he was going to tell about Edar Geen. This was exactly the man who needed to be avoided by all possible means. He changed his signs very often, so his soldiers were practically impossible to recognize. He must have had enormous forces, but his territory had no clear border. The couriers were afraid of him, so they were ordered to avoid him by any means. He had a huge scar on his face and long black hair. As it turned out, he was exactly the one they had met before. Realizing what it was, the courier did not believe them. The men explained that they had seen him near the tower on the first day they arrived in Hell. The couriers could not believe that they had managed to stay alive after meeting him. And it surprised him very much, because no one had managed to do this before. Edar Geen was the last of the main leaders on the island about whom they had told. If they had already met him, then they knew how thoughtless and dangerous he was. And he was the person who was best suited for this dangerous place. Now, they knew about all the most dangerous people on the island. If they wanted to live, they had to avoid meeting them at all costs. After that, they were going to move on. In front of them was a large stone in the shape of an egg. The stone was so huge that they seemed like tiny ants next to it. This was the stone that was supposed to show the way, and now they needed to turn left. On the way, he promised to tell them a lot of interesting things about the island and how to survive here. But suddenly, he told about another dangerous killer on the island. This was a cannibal bandit who had recently increased the number of his victims. There were few such cannibals, but it was necessary to remain on guard. They ate human flesh and used people as sacrifices, therefore, they were especially cruel. And very soon they have to hold their new ceremony, so they will need new people. The hunt for them should begin soon. Suddenly the man stopped because he saw a familiar tattoo on the courier's body. He saw the same symbols on the corpses of the victims left by the bandits, and it seemed that he understood who these guys could really be. They were the heirs of a famous figure, about whom all the bandits could know. The guys did not expect that he would be able to declassify them so quickly, but they began to laugh. But he warned that he did not want to tell about it from the very beginning. And he continued to laugh all the time, which raised a lot of questions for himself. And here, he began to say that one of them was too heavy. He meant the fat man. And when he was exposed, he would no longer want to carry him on his back. Suddenly, his comrades began to take out weapons. They tried to do it imperceptibly, so that others would not notice their actions. Now, the men began to doubt that they were being lured into a trap. And now, when they understood everything, they had to fight for their own survival. All the couriers took out knives and wanted to start a battle. They were armed and in fact not who they claimed to be. The bandits understood that they had fallen into a trap, and now they had no way to escape. They looked at the main character, who made them go with the guys, and convinced them that they could be trusted. It was a huge mistake, and it is not clear how it could all end. These people were one of the cannibals who were just now trying to find their new victim. Freddy Adu ordered the main character to step aside, because he did not want him to suffer as a result of the battle. Despite the fact that he had no weapon, he promised to kill them all and take revenge for the lie. The liars could not believe that they could cope with them all. But Freddy Adu was going to run away and came very close to them. The bandits were amazed by such bold behavior. But Freddy Adu accused them of being liars and cannibals who ate human flesh. Therefore, they had no right to live and had to be killed. He called them sick idiots who didn't deserve any chance at a normal life. He promised to do everything possible to kill them and not let them live. This angered the gang very much, and they were ready to kill him at that very moment. They started laughing again because they couldn't fully understand how he was going to fight against them all. But he wasn't going to hesitate and rushed into battle. He wasn't going to listen to the one who would soon be in his stomach anymore. He was about to strike and wanted to cut off his head. But Freddy Adu was not even going to back down and run away. At the last moment, he simply grabbed his hand and began to squeeze it with such force that his body trembled with pain. His weapon simply fell out of his hand. The man began to scream from the incredible pain and the force with which he squeezed his hand. Freddy Adu caught the knife and was about to strike back. Finally, he again accused him of all the crimes he had committed and cut off his other hand. From pain, the man began to scream. He didn't understand how the newcomer managed to become so strong and defeat him so easily. But he wanted them to feel the same way their victims felt. Meanwhile, Khan's soldiers started to move after meeting the crow. Just now, they were moving towards their territory and were about to meet their own leader. They were in a big hurry because the news was very important and they wanted to convey all the information. However, Liang Qiaochen felt very uneasy. She felt like someone was watching them, so she ordered everyone to stop and look around. The men listened to her because they also understood that the situation was very tense. However, they did not notice anything and did not understand that she could see something so terrible. In fact, she could not stand it anymore and was going to tell everything. But no one understood what really happened. The girl replied that she needed to go to the toilet, so she told them to wait for her. She herself returned to the same place where she had left the boy waiting. She hoped that he was still there and waiting for her. Therefore, she carefully approached the hollow in the tree and was going to check if he was still there. She very quietly turned to him and wanted him to recognize her by her voice. But no one answered, so she came closer to check what was happening. There was no one inside. She couldn't believe her eyes and couldn't understand where he could have gone. The girl thought that they had found him even now that he was dead. The situation was very scary because she understood that he wouldn't be able to protect himself. She liked him so much that she wanted to see him again. Liang Qiaochen, that he couldn't go too far. Therefore, she might have a chance to find him. Meanwhile, the men continued to wait for her. They didn't understand why she didn't come out of the bushes for so long and thought that she had just fallen asleep. The leader was already starting to get nervous and wanted to follow her. He tried to shout to her and ask how long they would have to wait, but no one answered. He started shouting to her again with even more force, but even this time everything was quiet. Now, the men were really scared and thought that something terrible might have happened. They rushed into the bushes to try to find her and protect her in case of danger. Carefully, they began to examine the entire area around them, trying to find any traces. But there was no one around and she left no trace. They carefully examined the entire area around them, but again they saw nothing. In addition, the men tried to shout to her, but it, as before, did not answer and remained silent. Now his patience was almost over, and he became really angry. Suddenly he heard a whistle, and immediately began to move in the direction from which the sound came. It seemed that they could hear her and understood that she was very close. The sound came from the hollow they were approaching. Near the tree, they saw a note that she had left. She wrote to them to go first. The men did not understand what to do, because soon the sun would set. But they could not leave the girl alone in the dark forest. On the other hand, they could not stay either because it was very risky and it was impossible to risk the whole team. And if the people of other lords found her, they would definitely kill her, because she was the daughter of the leader himself. And this was a good opportunity to take the prisoner and blackmail him. Still, he was going to return and tell the leader about everything that had happened. He left 2 people who were responsible for her to search for her. The search was to begin the next day because now staying here was very dangerous for all of them. They believed that the girl was not someone who could be caught so easily. But they did not even think that just now she was in serious danger. After all, without realizing it herself, she had fallen into a trap. The girl realized it too late because now she would not be able to free herself on her own. The rope on her leg began to tighten. Liang Qiaochen lost her balance and fell to the ground. From a strong blow to the ground, she lost consciousness, and the rope began to lift her up. She was trapped and could not free herself. Suddenly, she heard the voice of the man who had set the trap. Seeing that he had managed to catch the man, he was happy. It was a cannibal who had been waiting for his victim for a very long time and could not believe that it had finally happened. That same evening, he tied her up and brought her to his own territory. They had already lit a fire and were preparing for dinner. The girl was supposed to be their dinner, so they were preparing to eat her. The bandits were very hungry, but when they realized that they had caught the meat, they were happy. She tried to free herself, but she could not do anything. The men did not take their eyes off her and watched so that she would not escape. She tried to move away from them. Liang Chaochen did everything possible to try to untie the rope and free herself. She shook her head, but nothing worked. The bandage on her hands was too strong, so she could not tear it. Because of this, she became very angry, because she understood that she had made a terrible mistake. She fell to the ground and tried with all her strength to free herself. Or where you just watched her hopeless mistakes. Finally, it was time to cook dinner. Liang Chaochen understood perfectly well what awaited her and what a terrible situation she was in. She simply could not believe that everything would end like this for her, and the hungry bandit simply watched her. He was going to hit her right in the face so that she would finally calm down, and so, delaying, he began to beat her. He continued to beat her on the head until she lost consciousness again and calmed down. After that, he simply returned to his people. They continued to sit and talk, and the girl lay on the ground and did not come to herself. Meanwhile, the events moved to the main temple, where Khan lived. When he was told about what happened to his daughter, he could not believe a single word. He understood that his daughter was a child. She could not be sent away. The chief understood that he was to blame because he was the one who let her go and did not follow her. However, Khan did not consider him guilty because he knew his daughter well and that she did everything she wanted. He reported that she did not even need to be looked for and forgot about this matter. After all, he wanted her to finally start taking responsibility for her actions and feel all the danger she would be in. It was a very difficult decision for him, because any father will always worry about his child, and he believed that in a few days she would return on her own. It was also difficult for the man to make this decision, but he decided to agree with him and not look for her. But he had some doubts, and he did not know for sure whether she would be able to return again. It was understandable that the father wanted, but she had learned her lesson. But for him, she was also like a daughter, so he wanted to send a unit to search for her. Khan did not like these words very much, but he calmed down a lot and decided to trust him. Still, people should start looking for the girl right now. Meanwhile, Freddy Adu held a weapon in his hands. Other enemies could not understand how he managed to deal with them so easily, but it all ended very quickly, because they managed to kill all the cannibals and their bodies were lying on the ground. Then they decided to move on their own. At first, they wanted to talk to the main character who forced their lives and go with them. However, now, they had a much more important task, because they found themselves in an area that was completely unknown to them. They did not know in which direction they needed to move and how to get to Arthur Joe's lands. Seoman felt very bad. He understands his guilt and that he set them up again. They decided to go without him, but now that he didn't want to stay, he went with them. Meanwhile, the enemies were looking at Liang Chaochen and couldn't wait to finally cook her. She started to wake up and could already hear their conversation. They were carrying her to another place and were going to perform a special ritual and then start cooking her. Meanwhile, they already realized that it was the daughter of the Khan himself who was the only girl in their army. And most likely, she was very young. This made the cannibals even more, because they especially like to eat young girls. However, they did not know what could happen to them after Khan found out about everything. But they were going to do everything as quietly as possible so that no one would find out about it. It will be necessary to insert her bones so that her remains can come in, and guess what happened? The girl heard everything but did not dare to open her eyes so that they would understand that she had come to her senses. Meanwhile, the main character decided to rest and slept until the morning. The men understood that they had to move on, so they began to wake him up. When the hero did not wake up, he wanted to sleep for a few more minutes. He got very angry, so they started kicking him and forcing him to get up. They were not going to listen to him and give him a few minutes. Therefore, they began to count until he got to his feet. They were angry with him because he allowed himself too much, because now they were in a very dangerous situation and were on someone else's territory. They had no plan at all, so they had to think of what to do next. They did not know which direction to move, but they understood that they had to find Arthur Joe at any cost. They understood that they had made a mistake, because they killed the only people who knew the way to his village. But Freddy Adu did not want to take any of their minds with him and let them live. Because of this, they started arguing with each other again. But on the other hand, they had lost their last hope of reaching his settlement, and now they would have to wander. The only thing they knew was the information they had given about the route to his house. And even though they had been exposed, they knew the direction they had to go. It was lucky that they had given the full route because much of it turned out to be true. And even though they had only told it to gain trust, their words were true. Therefore, there was a high probability that they would really be able to reach his house. And now they knew exactly the direction they had to go. Suddenly, they heard a strange noise again. This immediately alerted and who drew attention. The men began to carefully examine the area around them, and they realized that the sound was coming directly from behind the trees that were in front of them. The guy began to watch what was happening, but he did not think at all that he could be noticed, so the bandits tried to hide him. With all their strength, they pulled him behind them, or hide in the bushes and wait out the danger. They began to cover his mouth so that the guy could not scream and did not give them away. As it turned out, cannibals were moving in their direction, carrying a girl with them. They did not suspect at all that they were being watched the whole time. Although they were careful, they did not think that there could be anyone in this territory. The men watched her every step, but she did not dare to attack them. They did not know how many there were and how strong these enemies were. The guy could not believe his eyes because he saw a familiar post, and very quickly, he realized that this was the same girl who saved his life. He began to break free because he did not want her to be killed. He tried to explain to the man that it was she who saved his life, and now she needed to be helped. Because of this, the bandit began to get nervous because he understood that the main character could betray them again. Also, he did not take his eyes off them and watched every step. Finally, they disappeared, and people were convinced that it was safe now. They left their own shelter and tried to find out what had happened to the hero and what had made him so nervous. Seomin understood his guilt and began to apologize for his behavior. He was sure that she was the same one. And he said that it was thanks to her that he remained alive and was now with them. Freddy Adu did not understand what he was hinting at. But the guy tried to explain that they had to save her. For these words, he received a strong slap in the face. The men hit him because his idea looked very ridiculous, because he was not going to do anything to save her and thought that the men would start helping him again. Freddy Adu did not owe her anything, therefore he did not have to do anything for her. And he did not care if she died, because he had never even seen her in his life. However, the main character had no opportunity to help her, and he could have done it, so he would have done it long ago. His words again made the man very angry, and he was again ready to hit him for the fact that he was only looking for an excuse. Besides, he was still angry with him because he was the one who got them into trouble. Freddy Adu couldn't believe that the guy was still so weak, and he couldn't let him continue to behave like that. But still, he didn't want to get into even more trouble than saving some girl. He was about to leave, but suddenly another man came up to him. Jay Koba was just looking at him. He understood that the guy really didn't have the strength to save her. He himself didn't see any prospects for that, or risking his life for the girl. Therefore, he wanted the main character to understand that nothing depended on him here, and he really could not do anything. He just needed to turn around and pretend that he did not see anything. Seo-min understood that the situation was very difficult. He was scared, but he understood that he was really weak. Therefore, he still decided to leave and leave her to die. This decision was very difficult for him, but he could not forgive himself for this. The thought of this would torment him for the rest of his life. Freddy Adu admitted that he was in pain, but as before, he was not going to help him again. He remembered his childhood and the day when he dreamed of becoming a police officer. Back then, he thought he was cool and very strong, and thought he could protect people from bad guys. But even then, he was weak. However, the thought of becoming a police officer haunted him. His lifelong dream was to protect the weak and help people who really needed help. It was a shame that he didn't become strong enough to protect anyone. When he realized this, he abandoned his dream and returned to his regular job. But he remembered meeting her and how she looked at him and that it could happen at any moment. However, she didn't do it and gave him a chance at life. Still, he decided to return and risk his own life for her, so he felt that he was the one who had to do it. The men could not believe their eyes. They understood that he was going to certain death, but they could not let him go so easily. Therefore, they began to run after him. Jay Koba understood that now, a fight could not be avoided. Meanwhile, Khan's people began to search for her. They returned to the place where they lost her and tried to find any traces. But nothing worked and she saw nothing. There was no sign of her presence at this place. Therefore, they decided to return and not start the search from the beginning. But the leader understood that they could move in that direction and search in the wrong place. Therefore, they could not simply turn back and had to continue at any cost. In addition, when they could not simply abandon the search and return lower. In addition, they were in foreign territory, which required permission because staying there was risky. The soldiers were tired but decided to continue. As before, they found nothing at all and did not know in which direction they should move. The man climbed a tall tree to survey the area around him, but he did not notice any traces of the girl's presence. Therefore, he decided to turn back. Everything was clean, and there were no traces of the battle around. Now they realized that they needed to change the search area and try to search in a completely different place. Therefore, they decided to go to another place and start searching there. Meanwhile, Freddy Adu caught up with the main character and tried to stop him. He began to pull him back so that the enemies would not hear them. He threw him to the ground and was ready to continue with his own hands for what he had done. After all, it was because of him that they always got into trouble and risked their lives. The main character showed the direction in which the bandits were moving, but Freddy Adu could not believe that he was really ready to run after her and risk his life. But in fact, he was ready to do it, despite the danger. Freddy Adu did not want to go with him until the last. When he realized that the guy would not run away, he decided to let him go. They did not know for sure whether she was still alive, but the guy assured that he definitely saw and knew that she was not dead, because he noticed how she shook her head and knew that in fact she was just waking up. In addition, he could not get rid of the feeling of guilt that constantly plagued him. Still, Freddy Adu decided to go and see if it was possible to save her, and if she was still alive and could be helped. Hearing this, the main character could not believe his words. Suddenly, another man also approached him. He also decided to go and try to save her if it was still possible, although he was still angry with the guy. However, he began to respect him for being willing to risk his life to save someone who had once helped him. They were going to continue their journey again after saving her. Now they began to carefully examine the area, trying to understand in which direction they were moving. They examined the tracks and looked for evidence of their movement. But suddenly, Freddy had done something that struck him very much. In front of him, he saw real cannibals, and right now, they were eating pieces of human flesh. They cut people into small pieces, costing their meat to taste. But the first piece was not at all tasty, and not the one they liked. In order for the meat to be tasty, they forced their slaves to work and play sports. And this batch of slaves that they were going to eat was not at all tasty. Their chief heard the screams and returned to check what really happened. He understood that these people were what they had left, so they were somehow much worse. The newcomers they had caught the day before were scared to death. Now they understood what the real situation was and what awaited them all. From fear, all the people began to tremble and waited for their death. This is even more, who could not wait to start eating their meat. Freddy Adu could not believe his own eyes when he saw this. Before him, he saw the prices of the bandits who brutally killed people. They were merciless killers and cruelly abused their victims. In addition, they performed terrible rituals of sacrifice. And they realized that they were one of those they had met and killed the previous day. The sacrifice ceremony was about to take place right now, so all the bandits were preparing for it. Freddy Adu was a criminal, but he couldn't understand how people could be so cruel. He had never seen this with his own eyes before, and this really annoyed them. The main character felt that he was very scared, but he tried to hold on. The bandits started laughing at him and thought that everything was fine with him. There were a lot of enemies, so in order to free the girl, a special plan was needed. They couldn't just break in and kill them all because it was impossible. But everything had to be done very quickly so that the girl would not die at all. They had nothing left to do but try to save her right now. But suddenly, they noticed that other bandits were behind them. They heard them and crept up from behind, which none of them expected at all. In front of them was a tall and strong man, but this didn't scare anyone except the main character. Now they realized that they were exposed, and they didn't have time to come up with any plan. Freddy Adu ordered the guy to sit down, and he himself dealt a strong blow right to the head of the gang U. So he didn't expect such a turn of events at all. And this was followed by a second blow, which was much stronger than the previous one. His jaw and teeth were broken. But that's not all, because the man wanted to make sure that he would no longer pose a threat to them. Therefore, he continued to beat him until he completely lost any signs of life. It was all over and his blood was on the ground. His body was lying on the ground and he was unconscious. Freddy Adu brutally killed him. He couldn't believe that this man could be capable of such things. Freddy Adu was tired of hiding and was ready to fight these men. Jacoba understood that it was risky, but he had no other choice. He understood that it made no sense and it was better to prepare. But they could not delay and risk the lives of innocent people. The main character was also supposed to participate. The men were going to explain to him what needed to be done to help them. When everything was ready, they began to carry out their plan. The main character was collecting stones and was supposed to attract the attention of the bandits. They carefully explained to him what needed to be done. It was necessary to save the girl or enter the battle at night, because then there was a greater chance of remaining unnoticed. But they did not know exactly how many enemies were near them. Therefore, to begin with, it was necessary to somehow provoke them and attract their attention. Therefore, his task was to attract as much attention as possible to himself and lure the bandits out. The guy began to whistle, and the operation began. In addition, he threw stones with all his might. He tried to hit one of them so that they would notice him and pay attention. The first stone started flying straight to the target, and it hit the wood, creating a lot of noise. After that, he started shouting and calling names to the men, and they noticed him immediately because he was just a few meters away from them. No one could understand what was really happening and how such a small boy dared to challenge them. He continued shouting and tried to provoke as many people as possible. He was explained that he needed to say a lot of words to get their attention. He continued to call them names and call them stupid idiots. Now he started calling names to their main leader and the god to whom they sacrificed. For them, this was a special topic, so they killed anyone who dared to offend their great god. Therefore, they were not going to let the boy go and let him just go. Immediately, they rushed to the attack and tried to kill him. The boy did not even expect that he would be able to attract their attention so quickly and easily. And when he saw that they began to pursue him, he began to run away. But the men were not going to let him go so easily. Almost everyone who was in the camp began to pursue him and tried to catch up. Before that, the men explained to him in which direction he needed to move. The main character had to meander between the trees so as not to be surrounded. It was obvious that they would try to split into two groups in order to capture him. Therefore, his task was simply to run and not let himself be perceived at any cost. And they would do everything possible to kill them from behind. The guy understood that the girl's life depended on him, so he agreed to this dangerous idea. At that moment, he started to run but saw that the enemies were catching up with him. In front of him was a tree, and he knew that his friends were hiding there, waiting for the enemies to appear. Now, he needed to turn around and start running in the other direction so that they could leave their shelter and pursue them from behind. So when he made a sharp turn and started running in the other direction, the bandits did not expect this at all, but they had no other choice. So they also turned and tried to split into two groups. Everything was going perfectly and exactly as the men had planned from the very beginning. They carefully watched what was happening and waited for the right moment. And when this moment came, they left their own shelter and started running right after them. The guy tried his best to run away from them. However, he understood that soon his strength would run out and they would be able to catch up with him. The enemies were almost there, but as before, he continued to change his direction and move unpredictably. Therefore, they decided to split up again and try to change their route to catch up with him. In another place sat Freddy Adu, who was waiting for them and was also ready to attack. He saw enemies running past him, but waited. There were a lot of them, and they were all chasing the main character. But suddenly, the last of them noticed that something was wrong. However, he did not have time to react, and Freddy Adu's hand pulled him towards him. Another noticed that his partner had disappeared somewhere. He stopped to check what had really happened to him. But turning around, he saw that he was nowhere to be found. He did not even suspect that Freddy Adu was sitting right in the bushes behind him. He held the man, but for now he left him alive, so as not to make a noise. He tried to strangle him so as not to let him scream, and waited patiently until he ran out of air. The bandit understood that something was wrong here, but when he saw nothing, he decided to continue the pursuit. He thought that he had just dreamed, but turning around again, he saw Freddy Adu, who began to approach him. He was close, and now, the bandit had no chance to escape. He killed him, and the others, not suspecting anything, continued the chase. But Jacobo was already waiting for him. He began to strangle him, not letting him break away and escape. With one strong movement, he broke his neck without any extra noise. The enemy was dead, and now he could move on and start killing other enemies. Jacobo did not stop and immediately started catching up with another man who was ahead. He was going to do the same to him and wanted to kill everyone one by one so as not to draw attention to himself. He rushed at him from behind just at the moment when the enemy did not expect it, and dealt a strong blow that the enemy fell to the ground dead. The other noticed this and realized that they had fallen into a trap, but it was too late because his friends could not be saved. He began to scream, trying to warn others that the enemies had surrounded them, but no one could believe his words. He pointed to the body of the dead man and said that they had been ambushed, and there were a lot of enemies. They were exposed, and at that moment, Jacoba was preparing to attack. The bandits tried to warn him that the danger was behind him, but it was too late. With all his strength, Jacoba hit him right in the face. After the enemy was on the ground, he delivered a strong kick to finish him off. His next victim was dead again, like all the others. But it wasn't the end, because he had many other enemies to deal with. But they were all so scared that they didn't dare to fight him. Finally, they realized that they had made a big mistake and ordered everyone to kill Jacoba. At that moment, they rushed to the attack. The fight was unfair because he had to fight 3 opponents. However, he was ready to accept this challenge and was going to kill them one by one. It was necessary to try very hard because he didn't have much time and had to chase the others. Therefore, he prepared to repel the attack of the first one who approached him. His strong sword blow was blocked. After that, he grabbed his arm, and with one strong blow, he broke it. It was so painful that the enemy started screaming. He immediately became very helpless and could no longer continue fighting due to the pain and injury. Meanwhile, another enemy was about to attack him from behind. Jacoba was ready for this and managed to get ahead of him. With all his strength, he pushed the man who was right in front of him. The enemies were on the ground, and this allowed him to be alone with the enemy. He had a little time to kill him before the others joined in or made him do it. Taking advantage of the moment, he kneed him with all his strength right in the head. He broke his jaw and knocked out his teeth. The bandit lost consciousness from the strong blow and fell to the ground. But to make sure that this was the end, he struck him again with a strong blow and smashed his face. The other men realized that they were wasting time and tried to get up. The bandit with a broken arm could not move because the severe pain did not allow him to do so. The other lay directly under him and could not free himself. At this time, Jacoba stood in front of him and watched his pathetic attempts to free himself. Now the bandit realized that he was finished. Meanwhile, the pursuit continued. The bandits realized that they had underestimated Seo Min from the very beginning. After all, in fact, he was much faster than they expected. But now, they managed to drive him into a dead end from which he could not escape. The bandit wanted to skin him and kill him in the most brutal way. He wanted the guy to ask him for forgiveness for what he said before he died. But Seo Min was not going to do this and did not regret his words. This made him even more angry. As soon as he was about to strike, he himself suffered from a strong attack by a man who managed to get close to him. The people who witnessed this could not believe their own eyes. They did not know how they managed to surround them and kill almost all the soldiers. After all, their leader was dead and it was impossible to save him. He fell to the ground and blood began to flow from his wound. Freddy Adu himself came out of the bushes and killed him. And now, he was ready to do everything possible to kill everyone else. Now they were not as brave as before, and were already afraid of the enemy, who was moving directly towards them. And Freddy Adu was sure that he could defeat and kill everyone who dared to approach him. He especially hated such people who bullied others. Seeing him, the main character was happy because he realized that he had been saved. He wanted to help fight, but the man told him not to interfere. But the hero grabbed a knife and was ready to fight, even though the enemies were much stronger. He looked them straight in the eye and was not afraid, but it didn't help him because Freddy Adu insisted on his own. He didn't let him get close because he was considered too weak for such a battle. And he believed that the guy could only create problems with his presence. He ordered him to just watch what was happening. The guy became sad because he wanted to help him and start fighting the enemies. Suddenly, the bandits started laughing when they saw them. They didn't believe he had enough strength to defeat them. Besides, there was an army of them and they outnumbered him. However, they didn't even suspect how strong he was standing in front of them. At that moment, Jacoba appeared and struck the first blow at one of them. This was exactly what no one expected, because they didn't know there was someone else. Jacoba started kicking the bandit to death, not letting him get up. He did this until he stopped interfering altogether. Now they surrounded the cannibals on both sides and were ready to fight them. There were 2 of them, but even that didn't scare the enemies. Despite the losses they suffered in the battle, they still underestimated them and didn't consider them a serious threat to themselves. With their words, they angered the hero even more. They were seriously determined to kill each of them without a chance of salvation. No one dared to strike, but because of their words, the bandits only got angrier. Suddenly, one of them shouted. He ordered everyone to start the attack and kill everyone who dared to stand in their way. The battle began and the man with red hair tried to strike. However, Freddy Adu was ready to meet him and fight back. Two people rushed at Jacoba at once, but he was not afraid and was not even going to give up. Freddy Adu grabbed his opponent. He put a knife to his neck and was going to stab him. And the main character simply watched everything that was happening. Suddenly, he saw something that scared him very much. After all, just at that moment, the enemy managed to get behind Freddy Adu and was going to strike. He understood that everything could end very tragically and something had to be done. Therefore, he left his shelter and ran to meet him, risking his own life. He stood in his way and actually saved the life of Freddy Adu, who did not even suspect anything. The bandit got angry and was ready to kill him. And, at that very moment, he was going to deliver a strong blow that would destroy the guy. Seomin understood that the risk was too high. After all, he would never be able to defeat such a strong enemy. But, suddenly, at that moment, Freddy Adu appeared, who saved his life and delivered a strong blow that knocked the enemy off his feet. The bandit was on the ground and began to bleed. Freddy Adu looked at him and was angry. After a while, the fight ended. The men looked at the bodies of the dead bandits who were lying on the ground. After that, he approached the main character and angrily looked straight into his eyes. The guy understood that trouble awaited him and began to smile. However, the man was not going to praise him for saving him. The hero was upset because he wanted to do the best and even risked his own life for this. Freddy Adu did not understand why he thought before entering into a relationship with him. But could the boy live with this all his life, knowing that he had killed a person? Therefore, he again warned him that he needed to think carefully before killing a person. After all, he was back to himself, that it was not easy at all. But still, he thanked him for the fact that the guy saved his life. And now, it was necessary to save the girl who had once saved him. It was impossible to relax because there were many enemies ahead who remained in the camp. Despite this, after a while they were all dead. The bandits calmly dealt with them because they were ordinary workers who were not so strong. Once inside the camp, they began to look for prisoners. Seeing her, the boy started screaming. The girl was lying on the ground and was unconscious. He tried to shout to her and wanted to bring her to her senses. Liang Xiaochen, hearing his voice, began to come to her senses. But for a while, she could not see anything and could not understand where she really was. Only after a while, she saw Seomin in front of her and could not believe her own eyes. Liang Xiaochen was even scared and therefore quickly started to get to her feet. She was very angry and was ready to kill him. The guy did not understand this and tried to free her and wanted to remove the bandage. And as soon as he did that, she started yelling at him for not waiting for her and leaving his hiding place. When she calmed down, she asked if he was okay and if he was injured. She was still angry, but she checked his arms and legs to make sure he was okay. She wanted to make sure he wasn't injured. Seomin smiled. He was very pleased that she was so worried about him. And then he replied that he had come to save her and help. Suddenly, Freddy Adu approached him, who rudely replied that they needed to hurry. It seemed that he was very angry with the guy because you were wasting a lot of time. When she saw them, the girl started screaming and tried to convince him that in reality, they were bad people and it was a trap. She believed that they wanted to capture him and kill him when they had the chance. She started to rebel against Freddy Adu and tried to protect the guy and do everything so that they wouldn't touch him. Freddy Adu couldn't understand what was happening. Jacoba was also very surprised by her behavior. Liang Xiaochen kept looking at the men and tried to free herself. Seomin was shocked by her behavior and couldn't understand what was happening. And in order to calm her down, he replied that they were his friends and had come with him. The events moved to a Buddhist statue, where a man was sitting on the ground and praying. Suddenly, he felt that someone had come to him, but he did not dare to turn back. As it turned out, it was the same mercenary, but the man was performing a sacred ritual that was supposed to free him from evil forces and the sins he had committed in his life. He was going to make a smelter and pay for his crimes that he had committed during his life. However, he knew the mercenary whom they had met before. They looked at each other with a very serious look, and finally, the old peacemaker began to smile. All his life, the old man had been trying to reconcile people who were at war. He had tried to stop wars, but lately he had been doing absolutely nothing. It seemed that he knew very well why the man had come to him, and at this thought he began to smile. He had seen him when he was a very small boy. However, now he had grown up and was not at all the same as before. But that was too long ago, and now times were completely different. In addition, his character had also changed a lot. It was because of this man who was his teacher that he became so serious and strong. However, he used to enjoy life and was very cheerful and happy. The teacher knew that he was his best student and would replace him. but it seemed that he was not at all happy about it. On the contrary, the old man was very serious and seemed even sad. But it was quite logical, because the boy was the strongest of his peers and always surpassed them in strength. He simply did not want to watch his beloved student suffer. So being in his place was a huge problem and a wound that would always hurt. And even when he is no longer a teacher, I won't be able to live peacefully, and that's it. The peacemaker asked why the man had come to him at this particular time. Perhaps it was because of his sins, and now the higher powers themselves had sent a man to replace him. But the teacher knew about this meeting even earlier, and himself facilitated it. Now the man asked why he had done this and what he really needed from him. But the mercenary did not answer, remained silent. He was not afraid of the power that the teacher still had and that he could attack him. However, he understood that the teacher was afraid of him and understood how strong he had become in recent years. After all, before he had attacked and killed anyone who came in front of him. Smiling, the teacher decided to prove to him that he was still a serious opponent. And a huge snake appeared before him, which was his most secret technique. But this was not the peak of his power at all, because this monster was the smallest of those he could summon. He was not going to take part in this anymore and did not want war. He was tired of fighting and wanted to rest. After that, he offered him to go with him. First, he wanted to talk, and only then finish what had begun many years ago. The man understood that it would take a lot of time, but he had no other choice. The old man wanted to know what had led him to the island and forced him to find it. He prepared for the meeting with him and prepared food. But it was too little, because recently he had traveled a lot and did not have his own home. The guy heard that terrible things were said about him. There were rumors that the old man had gone crazy, and now he was not at all the same as before. He no longer participated in wars and did not want to fight anyone. Now he had turned into a real hypocrite, because he was completely satisfied with what was happening on the island. But the man understood that he had shed a lot of blood and now he wanted to stop somehow. However, he did not understand that he had changed and believed that he had simply found his true self. The mercenary couldn't listen to this anymore. He couldn't stand it and hit the table. Meanwhile, the girl wanted to go to her territory. She just wanted to meet her own father and talk to him, but she couldn't convince the bandits. They didn't want to listen to her and go with her. After all, it was too far, and they had a completely different plan and were moving in a different direction. Jacoba didn't like how she behaved with them because she allowed herself to insult them and call them names. Moreover, she wasn't grateful to them for saving her and didn't take it seriously. However, Seo Min was tired of their quarrels and decided to intervene in the conversation. He wanted to reconcile and said that they shouldn't have quarreled. He wanted to convince the girl that the men who saved her were safe and had no intention of harming him. He was simply moving with them to meet the leader of the island. After that, he turned to Jacoba and asked him to keep himself in check, and reminded her that it was this girl who saved his life, and now he would simply thank her for the service. He was the one who should have followed her because the bandits simply saved her by helping him. Therefore, it was the main character who should have followed her because all responsibility for her life now fell on him. Hearing this, he was very surprised because he understood that he could not even protect himself, but he had no other choice. They left the camp, leaving behind a huge number of corpses. Meanwhile, the real leader returned there and even believed his eyes. He was shocked that someone dared to violate their sacred ritual and kill everyone who conducted it. He was angry because it was too much and was going to punish the one who so boldly invaded their sacred lands. The demon was not going to forgive anyone for this, even if the devil himself did it. The people who came with him were also shocked by what they saw. He ordered them all to unite and begin searching for the one who was involved in the massacre. Now their task was to take revenge, regardless of who the enemies who committed it were. He ordered to find them as soon as possible and bring them to him, alive or dead. The mercenary did not believe what his teacher said. For many years, he respected him and believed that everything possible should be done to reconcile the warring nations. However, now, he was disappointed, and the truth that had been with him all his life turned out to be an ordinary lie. All his words meant nothing, because the teacher himself refused them and chose a different path. The peacemaker did not answer anything and simply remained silent. He wasn't even going to deny his words. After all, he understood that all this was true. At this, their conversation was over, and the man didn't want to talk to him anymore. But the old man thought that he was just scared. At that moment, he did not understand what he really meant. The old man understood that he had not just come to him and most likely wanted to hear or learn something. And he understood that the answer to his question might not be what he expected. This could scare him, and suddenly the mercenary began to get angry. He could not believe that his teacher accused him of being afraid. He was like a child who always belonged to this teacher and his opinion. After all his life he depended only on him and tried to do everything not to disappoint him. He became his student because in childhood no one respected him and they mocked him. He was always on the sidelines and his peers did not accept him. His mind and body seemed to be torn into small pieces. The teacher had no choice but to leave him because the boy had repeatedly proven that he was the best and strongest among all the others. He endured and trained every day so as not to disappoint him and not to give him a lift. But now he understood that his teacher was right. Despite all the anger and strength that he now had, the man admitted that he was actually very scared. He was afraid that they would be disappointed in their mentor even more, and this anger would take over him. And he was afraid that they would not hold back and would want to take revenge on his teacher for not continuing the business he had lived his whole life by. And suddenly, after these words, a heavy downpour began. Now he tried to remain calm and not get angry. But the teacher pretended that he was not afraid at all. He did not want the man to manipulate him and make him afraid. But he could not do it any other way because this was his first teacher whom he truly loved. He was no longer going to look for another mentor. After all, he understood that he was the disciple of a traitor and no one would want to have anything to do with him. Also, he understood that he had made a huge mistake because without realizing it, he became very attached to the man who turned out to be a traitor, realizing that this was their last meeting. The old man prepared a gift for him and knew that the boy would keep it in his heart for many years. And most likely, he had never seen anything more terrible than this gift. The man understood that at this moment, something terrible was about to happen. The rain began to fall even harder, and at this very moment, the teacher rushed at him, trying to strike. The downpour continued with even greater force. He managed to dodge the first blow and stay alive. Another one also passed by him and did not touch him. He dodged every blow and remained whole and unharmed. But he was not going to attack him in return. The old man understood that his usual blows did not make any sense. But he could control the environment, so he was just going to use this power right now. He was going to use raindrops as a weapon, and he wanted to use them to advise the boy. She hit him in the eyes, so he had to turn away. Taking advantage of this, the old man approached him and tried to strike him hard. The claws were so close to his face that it seemed that this was the end. Meanwhile, perhaps it continued. Nevertheless, he managed to wound the boy and his blood appeared on the ground. The wound was shallow, but the wound bled profusely. For a short time, the man stopped and looked straight at his student. Blood flowed heavily down his hand and dripped onto the ground. As it turned out, the mercenary had also wounded him, and the old man's wound was much stronger and more deadly. He remembered the words of the Horde King, who forced him to go out into the world and renounce his faith, because there was no longer God in his heart. There was only suffering in his heart, and there was no longer any place for anything holy. The king warned him that he would never be able to become a saint, no matter how hard he tried and how many rituals he performed. Now, he would always be a prisoner of his own sins and would never be able to free his soul. He suggested that he go on a journey to Ostrom and try to make new acquaintances and find allies among people. However, the teacher understood that this could be very dangerous. After all, new acquaintances meant even greater pain for him. The king understood that he was wrong. After all, the man did not even try to find peace and free himself from everything he had done. Now, the old man understood that this moment could become the most responsible in his life. After all, at this moment, everything was decided. Despite the fact that his wound was deep, he was not going to retreat. And he wanted to continue fighting with him, so he took off the cloak that was hindering him. To finish, he wanted to take his student with him and not let him escape. Meanwhile, a downpour began to fall on the entire island. The bandits did not stop and continued to search for the people who were involved in the murder of their people. They wanted to return because of the heavy rain that did not allow them to continue their search. But the leader did not allow them to return because they had to take revenge no matter what. Moreover, they did not want to let the enemy escape even further and hide. The leader believed that the downpour had started for a reason. It was a sign, so they decided to return and begin preparations for the continuation of the ceremony. And they were to continue looking for the killers, but after the sacred ritual. Everyone liked it very much. Therefore, they returned. Meanwhile, the main characters were hiding from the bandits and were grateful that they had returned. After all, they were caught a little later. In order to hide, they made a special disguise for themselves, which allowed them to remain in hiding. In any case, now they were in very great danger. After all, they knew that the cannibals would definitely not stop, and sooner or later, they would continue their search until they found them. Therefore, they had to be as careful as possible. After all, this island was much more dangerous than they thought. Meanwhile, the king of the horde was very surprised when such a heavy downpour began. He did not expect this at all, and he knew that something terrible had happened on the island because such a terrible downpour never started just like that. And he understood that there were evil forces around the old teacher. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise behind him, and he saw his mother's warriors. Right now, they were searching for enemies on their own territory, and they didn't expect to meet him in such a place. They stood opposite each other, but no one dared to approach. The woman approached him cautiously. The man replied that just now, he was trying to find an old teacher who was in danger of dying. Her daughter wanted to attack him, but the girls were not stopped either. The girl replied that just now they were trying to find Ed Argeen. After all, he appeared again and dared to enter her territory. And they were always on very bad terms with him and tried to kill each other at the slightest opportunity. It seemed that the king was not at enmity with his mother. He said that he would return soon and come to her when I was there. And it will happen when the downpour ends. Having said goodbye, he went in his own direction. Mom also turned around with her own tribe and were going to continue the search. The man looked at them and understood that the situation on the island was very difficult now, because it would be very difficult for the living, because soon the war would begin. After a while, the downpour stopped. The mercenary stood in front of his former teacher. He was badly wounded and began to bleed. The man sat on the ground and understood that he no longer had a chance to save himself. He admitted that all his life he had only thought about himself and had made many mistakes. It was at this moment that he realized that his life was forever ruined, and he was not ready for this. However, now, it was impossible to change anything. He was sorry that he had never thought about his student. And at this moment, he realized his mistake and regretted only this most of all. But even now, he was not satisfied, because the mercenary was disappointed in him. He did not need any apologies from his teacher, and he was not going to listen to him. He simply wanted to forget about him, like a terrible dream, and he was going to leave, leaving him to die. After all, the God in whom he had believed all his life was now dead, and his teacher could continue to enjoy his hypocritical life. So in the end, he just left him. The teacher realized that, in fact, the boy had become ruthless. After all, he taught him to never forgive and never forget his enemies. But now, he realized that the boy saw him. The teacher realized that he was very wrong, because he did not see such a strong potential. Although from the very beginning, he was like all other ordinary children. Training was very difficult for him, and he made many mistakes. But he tried and tried to become better. For him, he was able to become a real father for whom he tried his best. In childhood, he was a very joyful and happy child. And that was exactly what he liked very much, because he had the hope that the boy would become invincible and the strongest. He thanked the boy for becoming a very kind and at the same time incredibly strong person, and that he knew how to forgive. The mercenary decided to stop by the tree. His wounds were severe and he understood that he needed to rest. Therefore, he remained sitting by the tree on the ground. Suddenly, he felt that someone was approaching him. Looking in the direction of the stranger, he realized that he was not mistaken. After all, it was the king himself, and he knew that soon he would appear. He stood right in front of him and looked at his pitiful state. The boy understood who was in front of him, but why did this man decide to appear right now, and how did he find out about what had happened? Now the king saw him and could not believe his own eyes. He had heard a lot about the teacher and knew that he was the special boy he was proud of. Seeing him, he thought, after all, the boy made an unpleasant impression on him and turned out to be not what he had thought from the very beginning. The mercenary explained to him that he and the teacher were not relatives and were in no way related by blood. However, the king did not agree with him because they were bound by a much greater bond. Their hearts were bound because in their hearts they had a common goal and counted on each other. He asked how their meeting was and how everything went. He looked at him carefully and saw the wounds on his body. The king asked if the teacher was still alive. The boy told him that the teacher he knew was dead. The king knew that this could calm him down, because with age, it was very difficult to find people to whom one could truly open up. He thanked the mercenary for allowing him to stay alive, because he had not seen him for a long time and wanted to meet. But when he was about to leave, suddenly, the boy stopped him. He replied that he was very sorry, but today the king must die. As it turned out, the king knew about this and knew about his appearance even before he saw him. And now, in front of him, he saw a boy who wanted to kill him. And he was determined and did not want to retreat, even despite his wounds. The king did not want to fight him right now because he had other things to do. It was impossible to escape from the island, and this was a guarantee that their meeting would not take place. And besides, he wanted to give the man time to prepare, because now he was not in the best shape. The king understood that the teacher used all his strength. Even this did not help him stop him. And this meant that the boy was really very strong. In addition, he assured that he had a reason to live. He took into account the fact that he was wounded and a former student of his friend, so today he decided to let him go. The boy began to tremble and became very angry. But he understood that the king was telling the truth, and he needed time to recover and kill him for sure. Therefore, they decided to meet again in a month. He promised that he would return in a month, and then the king would not be able to escape. After thanking him, the old man was about to leave. And he promised that he would keep his word and they would be able to meet again. Finally, he asked if the teacher had given him anything. However, the boy did not understand what he meant. Then the king replied that this was not the end, and soon he should receive this gift. If he wanted to meet him again, he could ask for a meeting. After all, he had kept this gift for a very long time and had been preparing for this moment all his life. This raised a lot of questions in the boy. Meanwhile, the events moved deep into the forest. Mom, together with her girls, I am worried about the place where they were going. They could not find their enemies because they had lost their trail. While they were outside the forest, it was difficult to pursue them. But each of them had been waiting for this moment for a long time. They had one suspect from their group whom they considered a traitor. She denied her guilt, but received a blow. The men ordered her to watch her tongue and not say anything unnecessary in the presence of her mother. For this, she could be killed and severely punished. And the girl, who was the youngest daughter of her mother, wanted to do it. Seiko, who was the 12th daughter of her mother, asked for forgiveness for her shameful behavior. But she was not angry with her at all, but on the contrary, praised her. She wanted to go back and cook a delicious dinner. And the younger daughter thought that she would still be punished. In the tent, it was very hot. It was at this moment that the man was able to be alone with the girl. He loved her like the last time. It was so hot that they sweated. He was very rough and strong, and that was exactly what she liked so much. She screamed with pleasure throughout the tent, so loud that the other people in the camp could easily hear them. The man finished. He was able to last a very long time. The girl liked everything and thanked him for this night. She wanted this every day and was ready to spend all the time only with him. Suddenly, she saw him naked again, and she threw herself into his arms. The man understood that this evening could really become unforgettable for them. And it all started from the very beginning. This time, he was even ruder to her and even beat her. But suddenly, he stopped. The girl thought that something was wrong. But he ordered her to get up. It seemed that he heard that someone had come to the tent, so he ordered her not to go out and to sit inside. He got dressed and was going to go out into the yard to check what had happened. She let him go, but she didn't want him to stay there because she wanted to continue. And he convinced her that he would be back soon and nothing bad would happen. But she understood that most likely this was not so. He opened the door and went outside. Outside, he saw people who began to approach him. It was Ed Argine who greeted him. The man had not expected to see him so late, especially in such a place. He had come to him with his army. Now he understood what had really happened. Wang Lising stared at his enemy for a long time and couldn't understand how he managed to find out that he was working with Arthur Zhou. But Ed Argine only smiled and said that nothing could be hidden from him. Wang Lixing realized that among his people there were traitors who had told everything about him and his plans. However, he couldn't even think that someone from his entourage was capable of such a thing. He tried to find out who it could be, and the first thing that came to his mind was a crow. Ed Argine suddenly stopped smiling and became very serious because it didn't make any sense. The man tried to convince him that there were always various rumors on the island and this was not true. But he couldn't convince the evil man, who only smiled. Wang Lixing tried to deny his guilt again, but in any case, he didn't care, and he wasn't afraid of him or his gang. Ed Argine smiled again and called him very nice. The man was angry because he considered him a bad dog who only did bad work. He wasn't even afraid to openly threaten him, and yet he decided to put an end to it. Ed Argine invited Wang Lixing to join him. Together, they would be able to defeat the master of the island and take away all power from him. Hearing this, the man just sent him away and didn't agree to these conditions. They would never be able to kill Arthur Zhou, even if the whole island united against him. Wang Lixing kicked him out because he didn't want to deal with people like him. Ed Argine didn't want to give up so easily, and when the man refused him, he promised to kill him. Suddenly, the door to his apartment opened. His wife, Lisa Rivera, came out. Wang Lixing was most afraid that the enemy would see her. Ed Arguin started laughing when he saw the woman, because he realized that she could be used to manipulate the man. Wang Lisheng was angry with her because she disobeyed him and decided to leave the apartment. However, she also wanted to protect her family from the enemy who had come to their territory on his own. She also understood that he was trying to lure the man to his side. If he doesn't join him, he will simply die. And she simply couldn't let that happen because she couldn't imagine her life without him. If they were to die today, she would want to do it with him. Wang Lisheng rushed to her and grabbed her shoulders because he didn't want her to suffer because of him. Watching this, the enemy began to mock. On the other hand, he understood that they had no choice because he wanted to beat them both. He turned to him again and decided to give him one last chance and offered to go with him. Only then did he promise that they would be able to stay alive. And if he refused, he promised to brutally kill him and his wife right in front of him, and promised to do it very cruelly and painfully. Wang Lisheng did not know what to do and was very afraid for his wife's life. Meanwhile, all the bandits were watching him. None of them took their eyes off him and waited for him to make his choice. Wang Lisheng lowered his head and was about to make the most difficult decision in his life. He asked again if there would be guarantees that no one would touch them. Ed Arguin was amazed at such audacity. He understood that the man was ready for this only for the sake of his wife, whom he wanted to protect, and he promised that he would not touch her. When Lisa Rivera realized that her husband had agreed, she could not believe it and started shouting at him. But he only calmly replied that he needed time to pack his things. Ed Arguin agreed to wait for him, because he had every right to do so. The man went into the house and silently began to pack his things. His wife tried to yell at him, but he did not answer. At this time, the bandits began to laugh at them. They could not calm down and teased the man and the woman. Lisa Rivera was angry, but she could not do anything. Wang Lisheng was ready to leave, and in a few minutes packed his things. He ordered her to run away from here and hide in some safe city, together with her parents. After all, he understood that sooner or later they would start looking for her and try to kill her. Finally, she decided to stop him. She said that if he left now, they would never see each other again, and would become strangers to each other. After all, if he sided with him, next time, they would be enemies and would no longer be able to see each other and be together. Therefore, she decided to offer him again to die together that day. Wang Lisheng could not believe it and hugged her tightly. He simply could not allow her to die for him and promised to be together, even being enemies. And he believed that even after everything that happened, they would be able to meet again. He believed that they would cope and be able to survive this. And sooner or later, the war would end and they would be able to be together again. Time was running out, so he understood that he had to leave. His wife began to cry because she understood that they were unlikely to ever see each other again. The bandits did not stop laughing at them. Suddenly, they heard someone's voice behind them. Immediately, they calmed down. One of them saw a man who approached him. With all his strength, Wang Lisheng struck a strong and powerful blow. He was so fast and powerful that the enemy did not even have time to react. He found himself lying on the ground with his head crushed and dead. Ed Arguin just silently watched what was happening, and saw how the man who was standing next to him was breathing very hard and trying to calm down. He turned to him and ordered not to look at him like that. Ed Arguin stepped back and ordered that he was a beginner so he could do whatever he wanted. And after that, smiling, he just decided to leave. Finally, Wang Lisheng looked at the side of his house. He saw his wife turn inside and close the door behind her. Ed Arguin was very pleased because now he had a lot of allies. Now he wanted to move on and soon prepared for war. Meanwhile, Seo Min's team was able to leave the bandit camp and break away from them. They moved forward and tried to find a way to Arthur Joe's house. All day they walked forward, overcoming the dense forest, reservoirs, and mountains that came across on their way. And at night they simply slept, finding a safe place for themselves. Also, they did not forget about the food that they tried to pick from the tree. Every night someone remained on duty and made sure that the enemies did not surround them and did not attack them by surprise. They had to overcome difficult obstacles on their way, but they did not stop and did it. Days and weeks passed like this, but they did not know whether they were moving in the right direction. Tired of eating only fruits and plants, they decided to hunt live prey. And thus, they were able to make a trap and watch the animals that began to approach. This was the first normal food that they would be able to hunt in their entire stay on the island. There was still a little left, and now they were ready. And suddenly everything worked out, their prey was hunted. In the evening, they made a fire and cooked food. They were satisfied with their work. After all, the meat was very tasty and they were all delighted with it. Suddenly, they started talking about the main character and could not believe that being so weak, he still had time to be alive. Seo Min had heard about this island many times, but he could never have thought that he himself could end up here. It seemed that he would not be able to live here for a single day. But now, a lot of time had passed and he was still alive. Jacoba smiled because the boys were very funny. Seo-min was initially afraid of them and thought they were a threat to him. But now he had a different opinion and no longer thought so. He thanked them for helping him and taking him with them. But Jacoba had a different opinion, and it seemed that the main character misunderstood everything. Seo-min understood that they were going to use him. After all, for them, he was just a gift that they were going to give to the main character in order to save themselves. But Freddy Adu said that now they changed their attitude towards him. So from the very beginning, they could have just cut off his arm with the tattoo and taken it with them. But they didn't do it. Looking at the main character, the men began to smile. In fact, Seo-min thought they were not as rude and mean as they seemed at first glance. He thought they were all much kinder and more cheerful. He started talking about the emotions they had experienced while on the island. But Freddy Adu stopped him because he didn't want to talk about it anymore. But the guy didn't stop and talked about how he had found his real friends. And in this difficult and hopeless situation, for the first time, he was able to feel relief and strength. And most importantly, he had a new hope for survival. In fact, it was difficult for the bandits to listen to his words because it seemed as if they were real friends and had known each other for a long time. For the guy, it didn't matter at all. Seo-min smiled as he said this, and he promised to treat them like his own brothers. Hearing this, they got so angry that they wanted to kill him with yoga, but he apologized and started laughing. If you think about it, even this island could be lived on. A lot had happened in the last few days, and he changed his mind. And now, this island didn't seem as scary to him as it had been from the beginning. Jacoba stopped him because he thought the guy was too optimistic and didn't agree with his words. He understood that the guy was wrong, because in reality they had completely different motives and thought primarily only of themselves. He watched Liang Chao-chen all the time, who did not say a word. He knew that she was the daughter of one of the most powerful rulers of the island, and they did not understand why she gave up such power and was now with them. They wanted to know more about her father, and so she started talking. They knew that her father was trying to regain power because in the past, he was the king of the entire island. Freddy Adu is her father again, because in the past, he was very famous. The girl was happy and tried to convince them to go to her father. But the men did not want to listen to her because they had other plans. Suddenly, the people started fighting with each other. The guy immediately intervened and tried to calm them down. He didn't want them to shout at each other. However, Liang Chao-chen started to get offended because they didn't want to listen to her. The guy tried to explain that they originally wanted to get to Arthur Joe because they had business. At this very time, or to try them on, he ordered Freddy Adu to simply agree with him. But the man didn't listen to him. He thought about it and remembered the events that had happened to them in the past. Once upon a time, he had been beaten very badly. He knew Arthur Joe because he had been his enemy for a long time. And it was he who had beaten him so badly, and now he was going to let him go. Together with him, they served in the army and held very high positions. But they wanted to escape because they were used and very cruelly deceived. Freddy Adu was tired and did not want to talk anymore. He ordered them to stop talking because he wanted to rest to gain strength for tomorrow. Freddy Adu seemed to them that they were just wasting time and wandering in circles in vain. And the girl decided that if they did not believe her, then she threatened to take the guy with her and go away with him. Freddy Adu could not allow this and was ready to attack her if she dared to take this step. An argument broke out between them, so the guy tried to calm her down again. He intervened because he understood that they could kill each other. Meanwhile, Moy visited the man he had dreamed of meeting for a very long time. He tried to find him for a long time, and finally, he managed to find him. In front of him was Gon Ponya himself, who had been a sergeant in the past. The fact is that the man urgently wanted to find Arthur Joe and was trying to meet him. He was convinced that the man must have known him and about the place where he was now. Gon Ponya did not immediately confess. For a few minutes, he was silent because he did not understand why he needed a powerful leader. The other men who worked at the factory stopped. They looked at the man who had come to them. They were all building a huge wall. Moy looked at her with delight and at the same time, with fear. Arthur Joe, who also worked in the factory with other people, was at the top, so he was asked to come down. And he was informed that Moy had come to him. He had heard that people were building a tower in order to try to escape from the island. It was simply huge, of incredible size. But he could not understand why the place was chosen here. Having come down, the leader greeted him. Moy, seeing him, bowed to him and greeted him. Arthur Joe saw how much he was afraid of him and wanted to know what he had really come for. It seemed to him that Moy wanted to declare war on him, and from these words, the man almost lost consciousness. Meanwhile, the girl began to lead them, but the men were not sure that she really knew the right way. Suddenly, Jacoba noticed a strange detail. He saw the same tree that they had passed a few days ago, because it meant that they had gotten lost. The girl tried to deny it because she believed that all trees were the same. However, that was not all, because the man drew his attention to a stone that he had also seen a few days ago. In addition, he had seen it several times. Jacoba asked to admit that she really did not know the way and did not know where they were going. He also thought that she was deliberately trying to confuse them and try to lead them astray. The main character saw how the girl who was being pressured began to doubt, and suddenly, she admitted that she really didn't know anything and didn't know in which direction they were moving. Now, Jacoba could be satisfied that he was able to expose her. But after these words, he simply couldn't believe what he had heard. She really didn't know where to look for him and in which part of the island his house was. In addition, she admitted that it was her first time here and had never been to this part of the island before. The men were very angry with her because of what she had done. After all, she could have said everything at once instead of wasting their time and leading them in circles. In fact, she believed that otherwise they would not have been able to take her with them and left her alone. The men did not understand why she wanted to go with him so much and why she needed it. They began to pressure her and noticed how she began to tremble with fear. The girl looked at the main character. After all, it was the leader who was to blame for everything. In her eyes, he was a real hero. The girl did not even notice how she looked away. She blushed very much and the men noticed it immediately. Jacoba was angry. Now he admitted that they were completely lost and did not know in which direction they should move. However, they did not even suspect that they were being watched all the time. It was the king of the horde, who had been following them all the time, and they noticed his presence. Suddenly, the girl heard someone approaching them. She turned to see who it really was, and she saw the king of the horde, who was her grandfather, and came out to the people, leaving his shelter. She ran to him, and for a while, the old man could not believe that it was his granddaughter in front of him. He could not understand and tried to find out what she was doing in the forest, surrounded by bandits. The man thought that she had run away, but the girl denied it and began to scream that it was not so. The king did not believe a single word she said because he knew her well and what she really was. He asked who her new friends were then, and she replied that they were traveling together and these men simply joined her during the journey. Liang Chao Chen confessed that they wanted to get to Arthur Zhou himself. But when the king heard this, he could not believe that they were really trying to find Arthur Zhou himself. Suddenly, the men began to understand who was really in front of them and who the old man was. Freddy Adu called his name and turned to him. After all, for him, it was an honor to meet him. But the king considered himself an ordinary criminal who was simply trying to raise a rebellion. However, Freddy Adu had heard about this version many times, but he could never believe it. But in fact, it was true, and the king himself confirmed it. Freddy Adu confirmed that they were indeed going to the island leader himself and wanted the old man to show them the right way. Luckily, the king was also going to visit him. And if the men didn't mind, he was ready to take them with him and allowed them to go with him. However, they were in no hurry to go with him. It seemed that they were in doubt, and the king noticed it immediately. Freddy Adu was delighted when he heard his offer, and he was ready to go with him and happily agreed to keep him company. But unlike him, Jacoba was not so sure. After all, he did not know whether he could be trusted and did not want to go with him so easily. However, he had no other choice, and in the end, he decided to agree. The girl who finally met the grandfather asked why he had not come to her for so long. But the old man did not expect that the girl would go with them and was shocked when he realized this. But on the other hand, he simply could not leave her alone in the forest, because it was really dangerous in the forest and she was very far from her own home. Still, he realized that she was lying, so he still agreed to take her with him. They started to quarrel and talk to each other. Only the main character was very sad and did not talk to anyone. Meanwhile, the peacemaker teacher remembered himself in his youth, how he and his student once trained and lived together. He constantly treated him to cupcakes, which he made so much, and the old man was happy to treat him and see how happy he was then. The boy constantly asked him to buy him some chocolates, which he loved so much. The teacher constantly warned him that he could not eat too much sweet. In addition, an adult mercenary was constantly watching him. He saw how the boy was offended when the teacher did not listen to him and did not do what he asked. He even took offense at him and allowed himself to leave the training, which caused the man anger and a sense of injustice. The teacher understood that his behavior was unacceptable. However, he could not change anything and left everything as it was. Meanwhile, other bandits had already come to his house. Now the teacher stood in front of them because he knew that they would soon come to him and was ready to meet. Edar Gain greeted him because he was glad to meet him. However, the man did not understand who he was and what he really wanted from him. The bandit said his own name and began to smile at him in return. After that, the man understood who was really in front of him because he constantly heard about his terrible crimes. For Edar Gain, it was a great honor that the teacher himself heard about him and his crimes. Furthermore, he knew how terrible and dangerous Edar Gain was. However, he did not even deny his guilt. Moreover, he did not regret what he had done at all, and he felt proud that she called him a real monster who was capable of killing a person. Personally, the man considered himself a real monster. He was convinced that he was the most terrible criminal on the entire island. For him, there was no such thing as good or bad. After all, he simply followed his instincts and did not obey the rules and laws. In addition, he did not even consider himself a person. After all, only people cared about the laws of morality and wore a good mask. He considered all people hypocrites who were ready to do anything for their own benefit and reward. And he could not stand any of the people and considered them all vile. Compared to people, animals seemed to him angels, so he chose to be them. He was a monster without masks who followed his instincts. He did not know if it was right, but he hoped that the old man would be able to understand him. And in the end, he offered him to join him and stand on his side. The man extended his hand to him and invited him to stand on his side. However, he understood that the old man's faith did not allow him to do this. In addition, he had recently decided to become a Buddha and live according to the laws of nature, so he could not accept such an offer from him. Ed Argyne fell silent. He considered the man worthless because he knew that in the past he was a monster and so shamefully lost his power. Therefore, he threatened to kill the man if he did not join him and refuse him. The old man did not answer and just silently looked straight into his eyes. Suddenly, he replied that his plan to become a Buddha had failed. He asked if Ed Argyne knew what he was called in the past. And the bandit knew that he was a snake god and ridiculed him for it. The man agreed with him, because in the past he really was a snake god. But that was not all, because only those with whom he was familiar knew this about him. And strangers called him simply the swordsman of death. Suddenly, Ed Argyne felt an incredible power and a terrible feeling that filled him. And he felt something begin to strangle him. Everyone saw the horror that was happening and could not believe their own eyes. Ed Argyne understood that the man was right behind him. And at that moment, he realized that he had become completely defenseless. He began to tremble and felt that he wanted to kill. With this feeling, he understood that he wanted to live in order to kill. The rumors were not true, because the teacher was still alive. Therefore, the bandit took out a weapon in order to kill him and feel relief that he had not killed for a long time. Suddenly, he struck a strong blow and cut the man in half, from head to toe. But Ed Argyne quickly realized that in fact, he was very wrong. After all, in fact, it was not him at all, but the real teacher was just behind him. At that moment, he was going to strike a strong and powerful blow, and Ed Argyne was completely unprepared for this. The man wounded him painfully and blood appeared on his body. He smiled because he thought that he was a much better soldier and warrior than he actually was. A very deep wound appeared on his body. Ed Argyne understood that he had underestimated the man and was mistaken, because in fact, he was not as easy to defeat as he had thought at first glance. However, this angered him even more, and he was not going to give up and only wanted revenge. At this moment, he tried to deliver a strong and powerful blow. He simply could not allow the man to at least try to defeat him, to injure him, and leave it unanswered. He tried to deliver a strong and powerful blow in return, but missed. At the last moment, the old man managed to dodge his attack. He jumped back, but that wasn't the end, because he was preparing to strike back. The bandit realized that he was a strong enough and worthy opponent, even despite his age. He got angry because he understood that it would be easy to defeat him. In addition, he understood that his life was on the line, and at that moment, he did not even try to calm down and retreat. The old man's words made him even more angry, and he tried to attack him again. Forgetting about his own safety, he rushed at him and started fighting. He wanted to do everything possible to kill him. But the old man did not even try, but simply dodged all his blows. He was so fast that all the attacks passed him by. Suddenly, the man used his snake technique to catch him by surprise. But he was in no hurry and did not want to kill him. At first, he wanted the enemy to calm down and come to his senses. When some time had passed, he decided to let him go. Ed Argyne again did not understand anything and did not know how the old man managed to stay so alive. Suddenly, he managed to catch him and strike back. He cut off his hand and blood appeared on his body. Now, the bandit was enjoying himself because he finally managed to achieve his goal and injure the enemy. In order not to expose himself to even greater danger, the man tried to run away and move away from him. The teacher jumped back and constantly held on to his wounded hand. He understood that he would not last long because he had started bleeding early. At that time, Ed Argyne laughed at him and felt like the strongest man in the world. He dared to mock him, despite the fact that a few minutes ago he himself was on the verge of death. And now, he felt his own superiority over him, because he was able to cut off his hand, and it was lying on the ground right in front of him. But this was not enough for him, because he wanted to finish the job and cut off his head. And only when the man was dead, he could calm down and confidently decide that he was the winner. He felt that the old man was weaker than him and felt very confident. It was thanks to this that he managed to cut off his hand. He was shocked that the man who had once been the strongest warrior had now become so weak and had lost to him. He had never believed that a self-taught man could be so weak and unable to defend himself. The others simply watched what was happening. Wang Li-sin was not satisfied and sincerely wanted the old man to gather his strength and be able to defeat him. Edargain admitted that he had managed to surprise him. But suddenly, he fell silent because he saw that something very strange was happening to the old man. After that, he could not believe his own eyes. He had never seen this before. Because right in front of his eyes, the old man grabbed his own hand. After that, he realized that it was the end and threw it back to the ground. He calmly bandaged his wound to stop the bleeding, and agreed that he had really underestimated him, and over time, he became much weaker. But it was not the end, because he was not going to retreat either. Suddenly, strange changes began to occur in his body. Everyone looked at it with fear and could not understand what was really happening. But very quickly, they realized that they were in a huge mess, because in front of him was a real monster. Edargain ordered everyone to run. After all, now only he and all the people from his team were in mortal danger. None of them could have foreseen this. But now it was too late. All of them were mortally wounded, because their faces had fatal cuts and deep wounds. The men began to scream in pain. They could not understand how this had happened, because none of them were prepared for such a turn of events. Wang Li-sin remained unharmed because the old man did not have time to attack him. Only those closest to the man were injured. He was so fast that they did not even see him. He tried to surround them and was about to attack the group of people who had separated from them again. Everyone heard the terrible screams of the people who were dying. The old man killed them one by one, sparing no one. He did it quickly and confidently, just cutting off their heads. It was so sudden and unpredictable that no one had time to escape or defend themselves. And those who were lucky enough to stay alive just watched what was happening. Edargain could not utter a single word. He could not believe that his best warriors could not evade him and were dying so miserably. Meanwhile, the old man killed everyone in his path and gradually tried to get to Edargain himself. When there were enough deaths, he stopped and stood silently right in front of his enemy and looked him straight in the eyes. The bandits who managed to stay alive had to stop him, but they were afraid and did not dare to do it. Wang Li-sin did not want to fight him, but understood that he simply had no other choice. They were ready to meet him, but did not dare to attack first, because they understood that they would not be able to win even with joint efforts. Meanwhile, the old man began to slowly and confidently approach his enemy. He walked straight through the crowd, bypassing the bodies of people who were now dead. There were very few opponents left on his path who were afraid of him, and Edargain said to kill him at any cost, and to do everything possible to try to stop him. No one dared not listen to him, and therefore the men simply had no other choice. Suddenly, they all screamed and rushed to attack. They all tried to attack him together. They even managed to get closer to the old man. And it seemed that this was the end, and finally, they would be able to kill him. Meanwhile, Arthur Joe asked the man to relax because he saw how nervous he was. In fact, he wanted to ask for help to find the girl who had disappeared in the forest. Arthur Joe agreed to help him and decided to give him a few people who would also go in search of her. Moy exhaled and was finally able to relax. He understood that the girl was not that simple and there would definitely be some problems that she would cause. Moy was angry because of the little girl, because her disappearance had created a lot of problems for him. And knowing her, he understood that this was only the beginning. He begged the girl not to do anything and to be okay. Meanwhile, she did not even suspect that they had already started looking for her. She, together with her team, moved through the forest and tried to find the right path. She had a very bad feeling and it seemed that someone was trying to find her. Moreover, other people also had the same opinion. Freddy Adu constantly made fun of her. And because of this, she got very angry with him. She even tried to hit him, and hit him in the leg, which was a very painful place. However, he could not hit her back because he respected her grandfather, who was next to them. He could only shout at her, which is why he used it. But still, he could not stand it and dared to enter into battle with her. They fought with each other, and everyone just watched what was happening. However, none of them intervened. Suddenly, the old man began to talk about how the leader of the island was building a tower in order to escape. The construction was progressing very successfully, and in a short time, he managed to build a lot. Now, they witnessed its construction, and they could not believe their own eyes, because it was truly something unique. They reached the tower, so soon they were to meet Arthur Joe himself, who was definitely at the construction site. It was impossible to delay. Therefore, they were in a hurry to be sure to find him. Before meeting him, the main character began to get nervous. After all, he knew about the true intentions of the men who were next to him. At one point, a group of bandits tried to kill the teacher. Altogether, they were going to attack him. It seemed that they were close to finally killing him. But at the last moment, he simply disappeared and everyone was shocked by this. Every time, he managed to dodge everyone like that. But the bandits did not stop and continued to try to hit him. He could only constantly run away and therefore decided to strike back. He managed to injure the men who rushed at him and tried to catch up. They could not let him get another chance to escape, and were amazed by his speed. So even despite his age, he remained very fast and strong. Every time he managed to get behind someone, and they only watched in amazement at everything he managed to do. None of them dared to get closer to him. Therefore, they attacked him only in a group. After all, they understood that alone they had no chance. And even the strongest warriors of Ed Argain had never seen this, because the old man was the strongest enemy any of them had ever faced in their lives. It was clear that their attacks were not yielding any results. Suddenly, he dared to strike back and managed to injure the bandit, cutting off his arm. Another, also seriously injured. Many people saw blood on their faces, and it was clear that this was the end of it. He quickly killed each of them, and the blood stains only dripped onto the ground from their wounded bodies. After everything was over, he moved towards his main enemy. Ed Argain saw how confidently and quickly he dealt with his enemies. They still remained alive. Each of them had a serious wound, and they could not understand how it happened, because everything happened too quickly. They only had time to see new wounds on their bodies, and some of them did not have arms or other parts of their bodies at all. The old man believed that they had made a huge mistake when they decided to attack him, because they could all have remained alive. But now, they themselves had accustomed themselves to suffering and would die in agony. Then, one of the bandits dared to attack him from behind. However, he managed to predict this, and the man managed to dodge. Ed Argain, who tried to get closer to him, could not do anything again. Because of this, he became even more angry. Another blow, much stronger than the previous ones. But even this time, he could not do anything. Why was Ed Argain angry? Because he understood that he had no chance. Suddenly, he saw the enemy trying to attack him. The old man managed to dodge the attack, but he was not going to run away, so he wanted to kill him and tried to do everything possible for this. In order to stay alive, he had to retreat back. But this did not bring any results, and the man was seriously injured. This time, he was not going to spare him. However, he quickly realized that this was not enough, because such an evil enemy as Ed Argain would definitely not stop. He almost managed to reach the teacher's body. However, the attack came from the side again, and he remained alive. Taking advantage of this, the teacher again tried to get closer to him. A strong blow forced him to retreat. But not for long, because Ed Argain went into battle again. This time, he put all the strength he had into his blow, and he tried to do everything possible to end the teacher's life there. But everything was not so simple, because even for this, he was ready. Using his feet, he managed to stop the attacker, and now he had the perfect opportunity to strike back. He only hoped that his enemy would be at least a little like a human in his next life. And now, on this terrible note, he was going to kill him. Suddenly, other bandits appeared who were very timely. After all, at the last moment, they struck a powerful blow, saving the life of their leader. The old man could not foresee this, so he found himself in danger. The novice became a hero because he saved the life of his leader. Despite the fact that he managed to injure the old man, he understood that he was not a human, because he was able to defend himself even without an arm. And this blow that knocked him down meant nothing. And it made him even more angry, because now he was ready to continue fighting. The old man got to his feet, and it seemed that he did not even feel this blow. He stood calmly and confidently in front of his enemies. The old man did not want to kill them and decided to give them one last chance. They had a chance to survive, which they could take advantage of. But suddenly, he noticed a lot of wounds on his body. His clothes were covered in blood. Ed Argain saw this and could not understand his eyes. He decided to take this opportunity and was ready to strike. One strong swing of the sword, and it seemed that the old man's life was cut short. Gradually and very slowly, he closed his eyes. Ed Argain cut off his head, and it seemed that it was all over. Meanwhile, the mercenary, who was very far away, felt that something terrible had happened. He and his teacher were connected, so he felt it on his own body. The old man's body began to fall to the ground, and the man felt that something terrible had happened, and most likely his only teacher was dead. Ed Argain stood in front of his body and was the winner. His head was on the ground now. He was finally dead. Ed Argain still couldn't calm down. For the first time, he realized that all his soldiers were pathetic and incapable of anything. After all, they all could do nothing against such a strong enemy and couldn't even stop him. Because of this, he was angry and couldn't control himself. Meanwhile, the search for the missing girl continued. The soldiers had already managed to find her weapon. Also, they came across traces of the trap she had fallen into the day before. But there were no animals in the area that could be hunted. Therefore, this meant that most likely she had fallen into a trap for humans. But who could be fishing for people in this area? And suddenly, he understood everything. They started running because they understood that they could be late and the time to save her was very short. They hurried because they understood that every minute was on their account, on which Liang Chaochen's life depended. Meanwhile, the events moved to the main headquarters of the mother. Her eldest daughter returned from hunting. She stood in front of the gate and wanted to be let in. She started knocking, and the girls who were on duty noticed that it was her. Before entering, it was necessary to check what was in her bag. And when they saw that there was a mother's daughter in front of them, they decided to let her go, even without checking. She returned and reported that Ed Argain was able to find a lot of allies for himself. Now, a lot of people on the island joined him. They all had a common goal. The girl understood that she should have stopped him, but she didn't have time, because her husband made a very difficult choice, and Wang Li-sin would never have joined him if her life didn't depend on it. Mom was not angry with him for this choice and believed that it was the right thing to do. Therefore, she shamed her daughter for apologizing for his choice. She was very hurt, therefore she could not hold back and started crying. The situation they found themselves in was much more difficult than they thought. After all, Ed Argain had now enlisted the support of strong leaders and was much more dangerous. Most likely, his informant was nearby because he constantly learned about the presence of people on the island. Mom believed that even among her loyal people, there could be traitors who worked for him. She decided to start looking for them later, because first, she needed to congratulate her eldest daughter on her return, and only then start looking for traitors, of which there could be a lot. Mui was very angry and was ready to kill the girl after he found her. He could not calm down, but suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. In front of him was a crow that he had not expected to see in front of him at all. He could not understand why he had come and what he really needed from him. But the crow assured him that he only wanted to help him. Moi did not accept his offer. But the man continued to insist on his own and convinced him that he really wanted to help him. Moi understood that he had no other option because now he really needed someone's support and help to find her. He had very little time because he understood that something terrible had happened. Moreover, he could not even think about his offer because the situation was really very difficult. In addition, it was a very responsible task for his leader, who was soon going to become the king of the entire island. Also, it was necessary to think about the war, which was no longer avoidable. And at this moment, the crow suggested that he join him. After all, for him it could be a very good option to do everything quickly and beautifully. Moi got angry when he heard this, and the crow had already reported that the Khan knew about everything. After all, he had told him every word about what had happened. In the meantime, the man decided to return to his leader. He told him about his daughter and the meeting with the crow, who suggested that he become a traitor. Because of this, the leader became very angry. He wanted Moi to deal with everything as soon as possible. Now it was necessary to start looking for traitors and do it as soon as possible. The Khan said that he was to become his deputy and decide all important matters while he was unable to do so. After all, he had raised him all his life as a true leader and could only trust him. He was his family, even though he was not his own son. Therefore, next time, he needed to make decisions on his own and not tell the leader about it. He needed to think like a leader and do everything for the benefit of his people. When the Khan finished speaking, he asked again if the man understood him. Knowing his answer, at the next meeting with the crow, he thought, the crow was curious about what answer he would get. And suddenly, unexpectedly for himself, Moi ordered him to go away. After all, he believed that he would have enough strength to deal with everything on his own. Hearing this, he began to laugh at him. The crow was about to leave and finally asked him to be careful on the way. Also, he was ready to accept his offer at any other moment when he was ready to do so. Moi just silently watched him follow, and also left, deciding to continue the search. Meanwhile, the search for the girl continued. The men realized that she could fall into the hands of the cannibals, who could sacrifice her. The soldier did not like this very much, who did not want to believe it. After all, he still hoped that she was alive. In addition, it was too early to draw such conclusions, because it was necessary to find out where she really was. They came to the camp of the cannibals, who denied their guilt and said that they knew nothing at all. As proof, they showed them their camp, which was clean, because they had never performed their ritual. They agreed that the girl could really be a good victim, but they really did not kill her. After all, if she had been among them, then most likely they would. They would definitely sacrifice her. They very much regretted that they had not found her earlier. The soldiers did not believe them and thought that they could have hidden her in their camp. But even here, the bandits denied their guilt. They did not consider themselves cowards, but they really did nothing. Suddenly, they decided to take a desperate step. And they told about the fact that a few days ago, their camp was attacked. Because of this, they lost all their bad ones and did not have time to prepare for the ritual. Therefore, this became a huge problem for them. And now, they realized that in fact, they were attacked because of saving the girl. After all, she was the daughter of the Khan himself, who ended up in their hands. And this meant that her saviors were not them, but someone else. But who then dared to take this desperate step? But whoever it was, they took the girl with them, and now they didn't know where she really was. So they ordered the boys to go away and not to disturb them preparing for the sacred ritual. Usually, they never let anyone out of their own territory alive. This time he decided to let them go so that more of his soldiers wouldn't die. But he only hoped that they would be the first to find her. The soldiers realized that they were too late. In addition, they realized that someone else had gotten ahead of them and saved the girl, but they still had to look for her and continue the search. Now they had no idea in which direction they needed to move. They ordered several men to stay here and watch the cannibals and what was happening inside their camp. Another was to report on what was happening in their camp. And everyone else was to split up and search for any traces of the girl. Meanwhile, the group of main characters was moving towards the tower. The king began to talk to the main character. He believed the boys and believed that he really had done nothing wrong in his life. And this meant that he simply ended up in the wrong city and interfered with the Federation, which thus decided to get rid of him. This was the king's personal opinion, but he was sure that everything was exactly like that. In addition, he knew about his strange origin, and that he had a unique rank. But realizing that he had said something wrong, the king immediately apologized and reassured the boy. He assured that he had said it without thinking and tried to do everything so that he would not question him. The boy did not understand anything and began to doubt what was more. After all, he knew that he was the one who was special, and it was very strange that even the king knew about it. Meanwhile, he tried to find out if Freddy Adu was really a soldier in the past, and as it turned out, it really was. After that, when he asked what unit he served in, and as it turned out, he was a soldier of the legendary Ranger unit. He participated in the most complex operations that took place around the world. But why did he leave the service then? The fact is that he participated in an operation that was very closely monitored by the Federation. They had a very difficult task and had to penetrate enemy territory to capture important points. They had to find important information, but the mission failed. As a result, they had to save the population of the city, which was destroyed. None of them wanted to do this because the population was hostile towards them. From the very beginning, he did not want to participate in this operation because he wanted to fight, not search for old children. Therefore, he realized that he could no longer follow orders in the Federation and left the service. He made this choice on his own and decided to leave. But how did he end up in this place then? Freddy Adu reported that he could not restrain himself and broke the law many times. After that, he tried to correct himself and went to work. Thanks to his military experience, it was very easy for him to become a guard and work in the security sector. The entire security system was automated, so he did almost nothing. At work, he constantly ate, so he gradually began to gain weight. While at work, he began to look around all the places where he was not allowed to go. And during such a walk, he managed to find a very strange place. It was a road and a building that he had never seen on maps before. Therefore, he could not help himself and decided to check what was really there. As a result, he was punished for his curiosity. After all, he saw things that he was never allowed to see. Now he understood that he needed to deny his guilt, but he could not do this. The king smiled when he heard his story. The man understood this and could not understand what made him smile. The king realized that it was because of such a trifle that he was sent here. And in fact, if he could turn back time, everything could be changed. Now he was going to talk to Jay Koba, who had been silent all the time. He was curious about how he got to this place and what bad things he had done in his life. In fact, he also participated in the production, as a result of which he was fired. They decided to punish him for knowing too much. In addition, the tattoos on his body had an important meaning. It was a sign of protection, indicating equality and justice. Jay Koba was surprised when he realized that the old man was so smart. But he replied that he had seen many people with similar tattoos when he was free. From his own experience, he knew that people with tattoos were very responsible and strong. But Jay Koba did not consider himself to be so, because he had really made a lot of mistakes in his life. His mind was completely fogged up at the moment when he did not even expect it. He tried to rebel, and therefore he was sent to the island as a punishment for it. The king understood that the life of each of them was very difficult. After all, they were not criminals because they simply wanted justice and knew much more than others. Before him were people who tried to break the system. But Jay Koba was sure that if he had the opportunity to go back in time, he would do it again. He always believed that something needed to be changed. Meanwhile, the main character tried to explain to the girl who the police were. But the king did not think that this was the end. He thought that there was a chance to escape from the island. The problem is that all the people who were here thought the same. But he knew a person who tried to resist. And just now he was pointing to the huge structure that was in front of them. It seemed that they had come and now were in place. Now everyone saw the true scale of what was being built. Arthur Joe tried to do the impossible and did everything to escape from the island. He sat alone and rested. This man was always silent. He was one of those who was not going to accept his fate and was going to change this world in any way. Now they needed to move on. They had just entered his territory. The people who were working hard turned their attention to the strangers who dared to come to them. The king, along with the other people, confidently moved in a crowd, and when everyone saw him, they bowed to him. Seomin was amazed when he saw all this with his own eyes. Jacoba remained tense and carefully watched their actions. Freddy Adu was also watching carefully what was happening. Suddenly, the old man stopped. He greeted the head of this island, who was standing right in front of him. Arthur Joe looked at him for a very long time and did not say a word. He carefully examined the people who came with him. He asked the old man not to call him that anymore because he was ashamed of his status. The king smiled because he thought he liked it very much. Now Arthur Joe was curious about why the guests had come to him. The king said that they were all newcomers who wanted to meet him for themselves. The bandits seemed very tense and understood that this was a crucial moment in their lives. The main character seemed to not understand anything, and he could not believe that the strongest person on this island was right in front of him. Also, the king introduced him to a girl whom he had last seen as a very small child. Suddenly, Liang Chaochen realized that the leader was her father's enemy and began to get angry. But Arthur Joe, you thought for a long time. Suddenly, he left his place and began to descend towards the people. Once on the ground, he slowly and confidently began to move towards them. Now that he stopped right in front of the girl, he put his hand on her head and was sincerely amazed at how much she had changed and grown over the years. He smiled because he was her uncle, whom she did not remember. The girl began to get angry. She hit him and knocked his hand in her head. She wanted to continue hitting him, but when she looked into his face, she decided to stop. She realized that she had made a mistake because she felt that this man was really very strong and dangerous. Arthur Joe told about Mui coming to him himself. If she had come a little earlier, they would have crossed paths. He asked if the girl knew that they were trying to find her, so he promised to contact him to tell him that she was with him. It was over and now the girl had to go home. But he didn't know why other people had come to him. He understood that they were not easy newcomers because they could still be alive. Jacoba did not hide the fact that he wanted to join him and become his soldier. He did not know what Freddy Adu thought and how he wanted to act. But he only spoke about himself, and therefore he replied that as a gift he brought a guy who was of double rank. Hearing this, the leader was very surprised. He approached the man closer and looked him straight in the eyes. He got the impression that he brought him with him in order to get a permit and have the opportunity to join his team. But Arthur Joe therefore asked why he was still alive. This was a real shock for him and for the bandits. Immediately, he began to justify himself and assured that he believed that the main character was actually innocent. His words greatly angered Arthur Joe, who believed that he was trying to justify himself to him. Jacoba tried to explain everything, but the man no longer listened to him and ordered the boy to be killed. After all, he had no desire to see him alive in front of him, so when he ordered him to be killed, Jacoba did not want to kill him and again tried to explain that he could be innocent. However, now the leader thought that they could use him as a human shield in order to stay alive themselves. And in that case, they were the only ones who had to die. After all, it seemed to him that they were looking at him very defiantly. Arthur Joe was not going to accept them just because they had a guy with such a rank. From the very beginning, they had only two options, either appease them with his corpse, or not to mention him in the first place. So now, he wanted them to make their choice. Either they kill him themselves or they die instead of him. The man again said that they had spent a lot of time together, so the bond between them had become stronger. So now, he wanted to check if they were ready to change everything for the sake of their own survival. After all, their affairs outside the island did not matter at all, because now they were in real hell. The main thing here is to kill in order to have a chance at their own survival. Arthur Joe wanted them to demonstrate to him that they were worthy of living, and now he ordered the king not to interfere in their duel. But the king could not just stand aside and watch what was happening. Freddy Adu just looked at his grandfather and hoped that he would help him. Liang Chaochen also could not believe that her grandfather would do nothing. Freddy Adu, that the leader was not at all the one he had heard about all his life. But Freddy Adu assured him that he had changed and was no longer the same as before. After all, they had never lived in Hell and did not know about the laws of survival. Whether they wanted it or not, the laws of the forest change everyone sooner or later. So he repeated his question again and gave them the opportunity to choose. The men looked around. The holiday looked at the guy who was standing behind them. He seemed very scared because he understood that most likely he would not be able to survive. Jacoba wanted to kill him because he understood that they had become very close during this time. The girl also looked at him and barely restrained herself from crying. Freddy Adu found it very difficult to make this decision, but he wanted to live and could not do otherwise. However, nevertheless, they decided to unite and try to fight off Arthur Joe and start fighting with him. And at that moment, they were ready to strike. Jacoba, despite his fear, was ready to attack him and deliver the decisive blow. And they wanted to die all together, but they were not going to kill the main character. Therefore, the leader understood that he had no other choice. He wanted to look at everything from the other side, but now he was ready to kill them, and he ordered his men to start attacking them. Mercenaries and bandits began to surround the people, and now they found themselves completely surrounded, being in the territory of a strong and dangerous enemy. Suddenly, one of the men intervened in the conversation. He suggested leaving them alive because at first glance, they seemed very wonderful to him. There was a curly-haired guy with red hair and glasses who did not look like a bandit at all, but the others did not agree with him because they wanted to watch what would happen next. They intended to test the people and find out what they were really capable of. Most considered them ordinary idiots who did not understand where they had ended up. Another old man also intervened in the conversation. He was a teacher and saw that the men had shown their courage and confidence, and he believed that this was quite enough for their trials to be considered complete. He turned to the leader because he believed that this was enough, and suddenly Arthur Joe smiled. He replied that he really understood everything, and that was quite enough. Their confidence was so strong that he even liked it. Now, the main character breathed a sigh of relief when he realized that he would stay alive. Arthur Joe told them to go rest because everything was over and no one would touch them. Suddenly, the king of the horde turned to him. After all, from the very beginning, he knew what kind of test awaited them and did not tell people anything. They were talking, but suddenly they heard the voice of an angry Jacoba. He was set for a serious fight, but realized that they were just being tested. The main character tried to calm him down because he understood that they risked exposing themselves to new danger, and the others watched with delight and laughter what was happening. Arthur Joe did not deny that it was just a test and understood that it could be very unpleasant. But he wanted them to think about the fact that she really gave him a worthy rebuff and was able to stand up for herself. And if something did not suit them, they could directly say about it and report it immediately. The angry men did not dare to speak again because they understood that next time they might be much less lucky. The old teacher wanted to apologize to the skills for deciding to test them, understanding that it could really be very unpleasant. He tried to explain that they did not do it out of evil intentions, and in fact, they needed to listen to him. They decided to ask the men for forgiveness for crossing the line and trying to separate them. Gradually, people began to get to know them. After all, now they were full members of their team. The guy with glasses personally got to know each of them. Other people, taking his example, also began to approach them and ask for forgiveness. They tried to convince the guys that there was no evil meaning in this. And gradually, each of them began to get to know each other. Meanwhile, the king of the horde wanted to talk to the leader one-on-one, and he hoped that Arthur Joe would refuse him his offer. The man understood that something serious could happen, so he needed to be talked to. Meanwhile, they tried to discuss the people who were new to their camp. The teacher tried to convince Arthur Joe that they had had enough of the trials, and now they could become full members of their team. The king warned the leader about the danger that was approaching them and that many of his soldiers had died and given their lives to find out what was really happening. Arthur Joe fell silent, and it seemed that he understood the risk that awaited him. He also understood that there were traitors on the island who wanted him dead and intended to kill him at the first opportunity. At this very time, the events moved to the North Atlantic to a remote island. There was preparation for a very important event. Everything was going as smoothly as possible, and the management was satisfied with the results. The man who reported, he said that they had no problems. They were laughing a lot, so they had to make sure that everything was going well. The mail was to be their backup plan in case nothing worked out. In addition, they had another main plan, according to which they also carefully prepared. He was perfect. The last batch was sent to the island and became the final stage. Now they could confidently declare that everything was ready and the preparation could be considered complete. Therefore, it was necessary to set out and start working on the implementation of their plan. Meanwhile, night fell in the leader's camp. Unnoticed by everyone, an unknown man came there. It was a crow who tried to scout the situation and watch what was happening. Suddenly, he was noticed by one of the men who happened to meet him in the darkness. Seeing him, he was at first confused. But then, he decided to ask him what he was doing so late at this hour and why he was here alone. The crow asked him in response what he was doing in this place. And when he heard about the Khan's daughter and found out that she was right here, he froze, because it was exactly what he needed. He also said that he was just going to the head of the clan, who was already waiting for him. Hearing this, the crow fell silent and looked at the man standing in front of him. And why was the Khan's daughter going to be taken away right now? Because it was night and very dark in the distance. However, this was the order of the leader himself, so the man should have hurried. He left the crow because he wanted to do it quickly and finally go to rest. In addition, he advised the crow not to wander through the forest, but rather to rest and eat something. Nevertheless, the crow let him go and finally asked to be careful. Soon he promised to return and asked to leave him some food so that he would not remain hungry. Meanwhile, in the Arthur Joe camp, a celebration was taking place, the acceptance of newcomers into the team. All the people were having fun, because another hard-working day had ended. They danced around the fire, jumped over it, and jumped. Also, they all drank beer, which they learned to brew themselves. In addition, various tournaments were held between the men, in which they competed. Two fought, trying to prove that they were stronger. The heroes were also treated to beer and invited to join the celebration, because now they were members of the team and had the right to do so. The voices of people and singing could be heard throughout the neighborhood. Meanwhile, a few kilometers from there, deep in the forest, a scream was heard. The man did not even expect that the crow could be so mean. After all, he brutally stabbed him with a knife, causing a fatal wound. The crow stood in front of its victim. He smiled and was glad that he was able to wound him. A few minutes ago, the still whole man did not even expect that the crow would start chasing him. Instead of leaving, he followed him and prepared to attack. The man sang and could not even think that this could happen to him. After all, he did not think that the crow could be so mean. He did not even notice how the crow approached him from behind. However, suddenly, he felt someone's presence. He turned and delivered a strong and sudden blow to defend himself. He hit him right in the chin. After that, he decided to continue and wanted to find out who was really in front of him. Therefore, he was going to shine a torch on himself to see his face. But at last, he realized who was really in front of him. The crow only smiled when he saw his frightened face. The man stopped because the crow scared him to death. The crow tried to calm him down and asked him to remove the torch from his face. He even got angry because the man hit him right in the face. But the crow explained that no other reaction could be expected. The men began to argue, but they understood that there was no need to waste time on this. Therefore, he decided to leave the crow. However, the crow had a different opinion and was preparing to strike back. Finally, the crow told the young man about his terrible plan, but the man did not believe him. The crow began to smile because he was convinced that he had an idea. After all his life, he dreamed of turning this island into a real empire in which he wanted to become the sole ruler. But having heard this, the man began to laugh at him. He did not believe that such a thing was even possible. However, the raven still continued to pursue him, and now he became curious. Why did he follow him all the time? The raven smiled and said that walking here alone could be very dangerous. The man laughed again. And at this very time, taking advantage of the moment, the raven took out a weapon and was about to strike. He heard the sound of a sword, but now it was too late. At the last moment, he decided to turn back to see what was really happening, and he saw how the raven, approaching him, struck him directly in the face. Blood appeared on his body. The wound was deadly and painful, so he fell to the ground and began to breathe heavily. The crow knelt before him. He smiled and silently looked at the man he had wounded. And he, bleeding, could not utter a single word and only groaned in pain. The crow found out what he wanted. After all, now he knew that Khan's daughter was with Arthur Joe, and that was where she could be found. Now, he wanted to go to Khan himself because he had an offer that he believed was impossible to refuse. He even felt excited because he had a feeling that soon his plan could be realized. After all, this meant that soon incomprehensible and unpredictable things could start happening on the island. Meanwhile, the celebration continued. But the king of the horde was about to leave. Other people approached him, asking him to stay with them and rest. However, the man understood that he was too old for this, and he did not want to disturb the young with his presence. Arthur Joe approached him and suggested a walk around the island. But the man had other plans, because he wanted to go visit the peacemaker teacher. He tried to find him earlier, but nothing worked. In addition, he had not heard any news from him for several days, so he did not want to postpone the visit any longer. Arthur Joe wanted the man to tell the teacher for him because he wanted to enlist his support. However, it was not so easy, because not everyone could win his favor. After all, he himself decided who to listen to and whose side to join. Therefore, Arthur Joe should not have built up false hopes. The king left him because he already had to leave. That same evening, the cannibals began to perform their ritual. Nevertheless, they managed to find the prisoners they were going to sacrifice. It all started, the men beat the drums. They worshipped their god, whom they were trying to summon to themselves, and the people who were their captives screamed and begged not to do this. However, it was too late. They tied them up and burned them alive. All the cannibals knelt down, because soon the god was supposed to appear and the ritual had already begun. Suddenly, a naked leader appeared in the crowd. Vi walked towards the flames. Now, he stopped in the center of the circle, which was drawn with the blood of the captives. In front of him was a special bowl with blood. Without thinking, he began to drink the blood of people. The next part of the ritual is to pour their blood over himself. Therefore, he began to pour human blood on his head. Soon, everything was ready. The drums began to play louder because this moment was the most important. Right now, he knelt down. The man began to pray and asked his god to come to him. The flame flared up stronger and stronger. The people were already dead, and their screams had died down. The air smelled of flesh and blood. However, the man realized that, in fact, he had not heard anything. He got to his feet. But no one could understand what was really happening. The ritual was interrupted because he ordered the music to stop. The man explained what had really happened. After all, this time, God refused to come to them and he failed to make contact with him. This time, the ritual failed to be carried out. But what happened? After all, they fulfilled all the conditions and were even able to find people for the sacrifice. But much more was needed for the sacrifice than the hearts of ordinary people. He needed the heart of a truly strong man who could attract his attention. But no one understood who was to become his sacrifice. And then, the cannibal replied that it was to be Arthur Joe himself. Meanwhile, after beating the teacher, Ed Arguin and his soldiers were sitting in a safe place. They were all wounded, so it took some time to recover. They examined their wounds and bandaged them to stop the bleeding. In addition, Ed Arguin was not satisfied with his men because they were weak. After all, he saw that in the battle against the man, they could not do anything to him and did not even injure him. Besides, he believed that yes, they would never be able to defeat Arthur Joe. The men were angry, however. No one dared to deny this. Ed Arguin began to threaten them and smiled. After all, he remembered how he killed a man by cutting off his head. And it seemed that was not all. He knew for sure that the old man had students who would want revenge. Therefore now, they should be careful, because they did not know for sure how many students the old man had and how strong all the rams could be. Despite this, it was impossible to stop, because his plan was the same. Ed Arguin wanted to capture the entire island and become its ruler. But his team members did not believe that this was possible at all, because the rams had lost too many people, and for this, they simply did not have enough strength. Ed Arguin did not want to hear this and believe it. Therefore, he tried to come up with a plan in order not to enter into open battle. It was necessary to come up with another method, and maybe it would be possible to lure people to a deep island. There, under cover of night, Ed Arguin wanted to arrange a massacre and throw the bodies of people to the bottom of the lake. Soon he was going to start implementing his plan. However, he knew that Arthur Joe had a lot of people who were good and strong warriors. Therefore, first, it was necessary to take care of them, to leave a strong leader without an army. The men listened carefully to him, but understood that it was practically impossible to implement this plan. However, they believed and hoped that they would be able to do it. After defeating Arthur Joe's army, they would be able to conquer the territory of Khan. And already there, one of his Hebrew servants would be able to establish his rule and become a leader in the lands. Hearing this, the bandit began to laugh and rejoice because he believed that he would be the leader in the lands. He was ready to do this, so he turned to Ed Arguin and asked him about it. But the bandit was in no hurry. In the battle, he lost his hand, so now he was no longer useful to him. And he was going to get rid of it because he could not constantly drag it along. He considered the man ineffective, but he convinced him otherwise and was ready to serve Ed Arguin until his death. To these words, Ed Arguin responded only with silence and did not react. Suddenly, he turned his attention to the newcomers. After all, they were sitting aside and did not join their conversation. Suddenly, he ordered two to come to him. The newcomers were scared because they did not know what would await them next. However, they simply had no other choice. They got up and headed towards him. Suddenly, one of them grabbed the man without an arm. Remembering their past quarrel, he started shouting at him and threatening to kill him. But this time, Vidar was not going to tolerate him anymore, and immediately grabbed the man by the neck. He lifted him above him and was ready to tear off his head. Vidar did not let go of him and continued to call him names and threaten. Ed Arguin silently watched everything and did not interfere in their fight. Meanwhile, the man began to choke and wanted to be helped. But Ed Arguin only smiled. Meanwhile, the king of the horde came to the teacher's territory, but I only saw his dead body without a head, which was hanged. At that very moment, the king of the horde was frightened, but he immediately noticed his disciple sitting high up on a rock. He stopped right in front of him and stood there silently for a while, not daring to speak first or reveal his presence. However, he was extremely enraged. The old man was boiling inside and doing his best to contain his anger. Eventually, he decided to speak to him. It seemed strange that he was still alive, which meant that he had either escaped or won, the latter being highly unlikely. The king of the horde shouted at him, and the disciple replied that he had fled because he hoped and believed that it was the only way he could survive. The king immediately tried to explain his position and said that he had been misunderstood. He had actually come with completely different intentions. He stood there looking at him, and said that he only wanted to see him, to drink tea together and calm down. He explained that he had been worried about what had happened to him. In the end, receiving no answer, he apologized and decided to leave so as not to disturb him any further. But at the last moment, the disciple looked at him, felt pity for the old man, and decided to ask him to stay. he did not want him to leave, realizing that at that moment, the old man truly needed his support. He agreed to drink tea with him, and after hearing these words, the old man froze in place. He had not expected this, and his whole body immediately began to tremble, which made him smile. He then turned his attention once again to the dead body hanging in front of him. It was suspended by the legs, head down, and it seemed to have been hanging there for a very long time, as there was not a single untouched spot left on it. He could no longer torment the body like this, so he decided to climb up and take it down. Carefully, he began lifting the dead man in order to untie him. After he had done so, they were finally able to talk, and the disciple confessed that he actually had a grandson. For some reason, lately he had been worrying about him intensely, constantly thinking about where he was and how he was doing. The old man said nothing in response and only looked at him silently and thoughtfully. He had not known that the disciple had any relatives at all, so he immediately wanted to meet him someday, though he was unsure whether they would be able to find common ground and warned that he might hit him. This reaction greatly displeased the man. He became angry, especially after the old man asked for his opinion. Now he decided to get to the point and began accusing him of harboring murderous intent. He was furious that his disciple had started killing people in front of the sacred statue of Buddha in such a holy place. But the disciple immediately stopped him, saying that the old man did not know the whole story and therefore could not judge him. He thought the old man was simply joking. He began to laugh, because if it was a joke, it was a very poor one. After that, he could no longer endure it and grabbed a stone, preparing to punish him. His entire body trembled with rage, and he immediately apologized for no longer being able to control himself. He explained that he had never thought he could become so angry at his disciple and punish him for it. But he understood that he simply had no other choice. Suddenly, he began talking about the past, wondering whether he would have become his mentor if they had met on this island rather than somewhere else. In truth, he had no answer, because he knew for certain that it would have been extremely difficult. This answer surprised him and seemed ambiguous. Nevertheless, he felt relief, realizing that despite everything, they had never truly been that close. At that moment, the old man simply froze and did not say a single word. A storm of thoughts swirled in his head, and all he heard was the old man promising that he would help him reach the state of Buddha. Finally, he realized that the time to act had come. He did not know whether his opponent truly wanted this or meant something else, but the old man decided to remove his clothes. He wanted the men to pay for daring to take other people's lives. Now he intended to punish them for everything they had done. Meanwhile, in the women's camp, everyone was discussing the same news. They were convinced that the disciple had been killed by Ed Gein, as it was he who had spread this rumor across the island. They were also curious how he had managed to win and what had truly happened to him, knowing that the disciple would never surrender without a fight and had caused him considerable trouble. All that was known was that he had headed toward the Black Gorge, where he might now be hiding with his team. This information greatly angered the leader of the women, because she believed that the dead man could have become their ally, as they had already met before. She kept replaying thoughts about the Black Gorge in her head, already considering how to get there in order to find him and take revenge. Suddenly, someone else entered the room. It was Mother herself, who looked like the eldest of the women. She asked what she truly thought about the situation, and what they had decided to do next. Now that they had killed him, they realized there was nothing left to hide, and they could do whatever they wanted on the island. Mother was convinced that they had actually wanted to destroy the island, and were doing everything possible to achieve that. There was no doubt that everyone was disappointed with the current situation on the island, and all were waiting to see how it would end. A real war was about to begin, as everyone who harbored resentment toward Arthur would join Ed Gein and stand by his side. It would now be difficult to rely on him, as Ed Gein had proven that he was capable of committing truly horrific crimes. It became clear to everyone that they needed to start thinking seriously about total war. They also tried to determine who might become his next target, who he would want to kill next. It was extremely difficult to guess, as the next target could be anyone. The woman thought it might be one of the faction leaders. Perhaps they had deliberately spread rumors about the death of one of the leaders in order to intimidate the others and sow panic before the Great War. Despite not knowing whom Slucci would try to kill next, there was no doubt that he would attempt it. Everything pointed to Ivan becoming the next target, and planning an attack on him and his people could begin at any moment. Everyone lived in anticipation of an imminent battle that was about to begin. However, knowing him, one could assume that his target might change at the very last moment, and that he might choose someone else instead. Everyone knew they were now in the Black Gorge, where finding them would be extremely difficult, giving them some time to prepare. Mother believed that he would not attack the Great Khan, as that leader was quite strong. He had lost too much strength in his last battle and was not capable of such an attack yet. However, the woman had a different opinion. She believed things were not that simple. At this moment, their main task was to think about themselves and how to protect themselves. Meanwhile, the events shifted to Arthur's camp. All the women in the camp began preparing for the battle that was about to take place. Despite the danger and the enemy's numbers, many people did not take the threat seriously and failed to prepare properly. This greatly angered the woman, and she wanted to punish those who disobeyed her and failed to follow orders. Meanwhile, the men continued searching for the girl, but there were no traces left behind. They searched the entire area, but after a long time it yielded no results, and they still had no leads. They also began to suspect religious fanatics, who might have been involved in the abduction and committed some crime against the girl. However, they said nothing, most likely because they intended to perform some ritual and make a sacrifice. The girl was an ideal target for such a ritual. Her young body would quickly attract the attention of religious fanatics. The leader asked whether they had noticed anything unusual while interrogating or interacting with the fanatics. His assistant replied that nothing unusual had been observed. They behaved as they always did and denied any guilt. Nevertheless, they needed to continue monitoring them and searching for any clues, as they could not be trusted. He also asked whether there had been any contact from the deep forest, as the girl might have been there. But the people who returned from there had also heard nothing about her. No one had seen her, making the search even more difficult. The man was close to losing his mind. Such things had happened before, but this time they could not find her for a very long time. They now believed that something truly terrible might have happened to her. But the leader refused to accept this, knowing what consequences awaited him from her father. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise in the bushes behind him, which immediately caught his attention. It became clear someone was approaching. It was a fairly large group of people. He turned toward the sound to see who it was and what was actually happening. As it turned out, it was a group led by another leader. Upon seeing him, he smiled and said that he had been trying to find him for a very long time. The leader asked what he meant and why he had come to him at this particular moment. Suddenly, he heard the answer that the man had also been searching for the girl. All of his people began shouting, immediately suspecting him of kidnapping the girl. But he explained that there was no need to worry, as she was with his commander and was in a safe place. The man asked how long she had been with them and what they had done to her. He received the answer. She had arrived together with Ivan after he and his people had disappeared. Had he arrived a little later, he could have seen her and returned her to the camp without all those long searches. But now, it was already too late. They had taken the girl and did not intend to give her up so easily. He had found him in order to carry out his commander's order. The man did not know his true intentions, so he was supposed to bring him directly to the commander so they could discuss everything. The Khan wondered why he had come with an entire group of armed men. Then the man looked at his people and fell silent before answering. He smiled and repeated that it was his commander's order, who had taken the matter very seriously and provided men to ensure the order was fulfilled. He invited him to go with them and accompany them. If he agreed, he would be able to see his daughter and take her with him. He also promised that she was safe and that nothing bad would happen to her. The man fell silent and looked at him thoughtfully. People from both camps began exchanging glances with one another. Everyone expected that something terrible was about to happen and that a real massacre would begin. For the first time in several minutes, the Khan's leader made a sound. He smiled and said that in that case, he should have chosen his men more carefully. With these words, he publicly humiliated both him and his army, calling them weak, as it was obvious that all of them were nervous. He had noticed this from the very beginning, the moment they appeared. And now there was no doubt. They had been ready for this all along. After his words, the enemy smiled and said that he had warned him from the very beginning not to do this. But now, twice as many people appeared behind him, all ready for battle. He placed his hand on the shoulder of one of them, as if signaling that it was time to attack and fight. Despite admitting that they were actually weak, they made up for it with sheer numbers. Moreover, they were armed and ready to fight to the death, despite their fear. Smiling, he wished him good luck and said that only the strongest would survive this confrontation. The man did not expect this. He was not prepared to fight again and spill more blood. Both sides were ready for a brutal battle, and the air between them was thick with tension. The leader looked at his men, assessing whether he could win, while the enemy began to surround them. He understood that the situation was critical. The enemy outnumbered his people several times over. Suddenly, the criminal shouted that now he had to prove that he truly deserved to survive. At that moment, he realized there was no avoiding the fight. It would have to happen, and most likely, it would be to the death. After the brutal clash, the ground was soaked in blood. He and his men were beaten mercilessly, and realizing they had no chance, he chose to retreat to save their lives. His enemy reveled in the moment, for he had dreamed for many years of standing above him and feeling his power. He laughed continuously, which only fueled the man's anger. His companions urged him not to argue now and to remain silent. However, a new plan formed in their minds. They were not the kind of men who surrendered so easily. But another immediately dismissed the idea, unwilling to risk the lives of the others, wanting at least the leader to survive. The criminal standing before them ordered them not to glare at him with such hatred. After all, they knew perfectly well where they were now. He recalled that from the very beginning he had offered his help, but they had refused it and therefore deserved this punishment. He called their actions a true betrayal, a stab in the back he had never expected. The men whispered among themselves, trying to negotiate and come up with a plan. At that moment, they turned to the criminal and said there was nothing to discuss. He did not expect that even in such a position they would continue to resist. He simply smiled and replied that soon every one of them would die, and the girl they had been searching for would end up with Arthur, after which they would never see her again. She would not return alive. The girl was a powerful bargaining chip that could be used to blackmail the entire island. But once she was with Arthur, no one would dare touch her. Even the criminal did not want her to end up with him because no one would dare go against Arthur himself, so she had to be taken somewhere safe. He had a plan, and the men needed to listen carefully, but the men were focused on something else. While he spoke, they prepared for a desperate move. Despite the slim chances of survival, they were ready to strike first, and the leader gave the signal. Suddenly, the criminal asked a question, making it clear that once Arthur took possession of the girl, she would no longer be safe. Even the entire island would be unable to save her. That was when fear would truly begin. And this plan seemed optimal to him, a way to manipulate them into negotiation. The man understood this perfectly and called the attempt at manipulation pathetic. He refused to obey him and decided to attack. Suddenly, one of his warriors rushed at the criminal, grabbing his arms to prevent him from moving or escaping. Another blocked the enemy's actions, shielding his comrade with his own body to give the leader a chance to escape. His soldiers, sacrificing their lives, held back the enemies, begging the leader to flee and leave them behind. They were stabbed with knives and suffered deep wounds, yet they did not stop. The leader could not believe his eyes. For the first time, he realized that true warriors and loyal men stood beside him. But he had to survive. He had to tell what had happened and seek support from his superior. He knew that if he died as well, no one would ever save the girl, so he ran. His men shouted for him to tell the truth and destroy the enemies with other soldiers. He moved farther away as the bandits tried to break free and chase him. With their last strength, his men held the attackers back, preventing them from pursuing him. The man holding the enemy realized he was dying and bleeding out. All of them were brutally killed and cut to pieces. No one was allowed to escape. Crying, the leader ran farther away, feeling ashamed and unworthy of their sacrifice. Yet he knew that saving the girl was the only thing that mattered. The criminals followed his trail and began the pursuit. He tried to calm himself and break away. If he were caught, all sacrifices would be in vain. The enemies drew closer, weapons ready for a fatal strike. His body ached terribly after the beating. The pain in his muscles was unbearable. Still, he could not stop. He maneuvered between trees and ran with all the strength he had left. He ran the wrong way and soon realized he was trapped at the edge of a cliff. Yet he seemed confident, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Seeing where he was, he understood he might not have the strength to reach the opposite cliff. But there was no way back, so he decided to try. Gathering speed, he jumped, despite the extremely slim chance of success. No one dared to jump after him. They remained on the other side, watching him fall. But they were wrong. He made it, grabbing the edge of the cliff at the last moment. Suddenly, he realized it was too early to celebrate. The rocks began to crumble, and he risked falling to his death. In that moment, he understood this could be the end. Finally, he lost his grip and fell downward. No one could believe it would end like this. He was surely going to die. But at the last second, he managed to grab onto a vine. Hanging there, he could not believe he was still alive. His body ached from the impact. He thought his arm was broken and struggled to breathe. The enemies were frustrated that he survived. They would now have to chase him down. The leader watched everything unfold and knew something had to be done. He shouted at his men for failing to catch him and letting him escape. He blamed them for the escape and ordered them to climb down after him. Meanwhile, the man tried to get out, using every ounce of strength he had left. The enemy leader was furious that his men had let him go so easily. He could not understand why the man abandoned his comrades. Perhaps someone was protecting him. Regardless, he could not be allowed to escape and had to be killed at any cost. Holding a knife, he decided to do it himself. He approached the gorge where the man was hanging and threw his knife straight at him. The knife struck true, lodging in his back and delivering a fatal wound. Blood poured from his mouth. He could no longer hold on. At that moment, he released his grip and fell to the ground. The landing was agonizing. He fell among bushes, hidden from view above. The criminal stood above for a while, listening for any sound, wanting to be sure the man was dead. Unwilling to retreat, he ordered his men to descend and check the body. Once found, they were to bring it to the others. He wanted them buried together. Only then could they return to their territory, taking the wounded with them. It was clear he did not intend to go with them. His men asked why. He replied that he had a meeting with Ed to discuss everything. After meeting with him, he promised to return to them the following morning. He ordered his men to go to Arthur and report that those people were dead and no longer posed any threat. He also emphasized that this news had to spread quickly across the entire island so that everyone would know what had happened. Meanwhile, rustling and heavy breathing could still be heard in the bushes. Despite the fact that the man had fallen to the ground and was gravely wounded, he was still moving and struggling not to die. The leader lay on the ground, breathing heavily, trying to endure the intense pain throughout his body. At that moment, he noticed that he was still conscious and could move his hand. Despite the severe wound in his back, he had not lost sensation. Meanwhile, near the statue of Buddha, a real massacre had taken place. The ground was covered with countless dead bodies. Everything was soaked in blood and scattered with pieces of human remains. After the battle, the man stretched, bringing his muscles back into tone. He sat calmly among the crowd of people who were already dead and would never rise again. He was the king of the horde, and he was truly enraged yet satisfied with his work. He had managed to destroy all of his enemies. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the Black Gorge, where Ed and his men were planning their next move. They were trying to decide who their next target would be. They had also learned that a battle had taken place near the statue, resulting in many deaths, and the leader suspected it was the king's doing. He knew every part of the island and was certain that it was him. For now, they decided to do nothing and avoid risk, simply watching which settlement would fall next. However, his men could not believe they would just sit back and do nothing. He also knew about the deaths in the forest, and that one of them had most likely escaped, though he believed the man had died from the fall. After thinking it over, he realized he had an idea that he wanted to consider and discuss with someone else. They were also curious about why the Golden Old King truly mattered, and where he was now. The red-haired man was confident that they could simply find him and kill him. Meanwhile, the leader watched him closely and listened to everything he said, yet did not utter a single word. He repeated once again that they simply needed to wait. It was another attempt to gain the leader's favor, but even this time, it failed. He lowered his head and listened to their conversations, feeling humiliated, constantly trying to prove himself, yet never being taken seriously. Eventually, he stood up and decided to leave. Everyone insisted that it was better to wait, as attacking him first would be extremely dangerous and would only cause greater harm. His enemy, with whom he had nearly fought the day before, watched him closely, listening to everything he said. Suddenly, the same criminal appeared in the camp. He locked eyes with the man at the very moment he was about to leave. They knew each other, and he was surprised to see him among the crowd, unable to understand how he had gotten there. Ed did not expect him to return so soon. It meant that something truly terrible might have happened. The man continued to mock him. He also noticed some changes in his body, and realized that he no longer had an arm. He burst out laughing again, mocking him even more, and immediately understood that they had tried to fight Genzo. After all, only Genzo could defeat him and survive. At that moment, Ed himself stepped into the conversation and asked what had happened and why he had come to his camp. He asked whether something truly so terrible had occurred that he could not come at another time. They exchanged glances, looking at one another. He laughed at him once more, as if he knew something Ed did not, and advised him to confess. This angered Ed, and he simply walked away. He believed that now was the perfect moment for this. When he began speaking about the Khan's daughter, who might end up with Arthur, the man stopped and began to tremble. He could not believe that his words were true.